The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
My privilege to be here today at the guest of my representative, Bruce Vogel. I brought one of my favorite northern pike lures. It's a Ken Thompson number 4 red and white, and it's got a lot of good teeth marks on it. One of the hazards of using these big spoons is the treble hook on the bottom. And you can catch a big northern pike, and when you're taking him off the hook, with one quick flash of his head, he can bury one of those hooks in your finger, your hand, or even your arm. In hospitals in northern Minnesota, that's a frequent reason in the summertime for a visit to the emergency room. The solution is to bend the barb back or clip the hook off so you can back it out of your flesh and get rid of the pain. The reason I tell you that is that it illustrates a spiritual reality. Getting a hook buried in you can hurt as much as an unkind word or deed stuck in you. It's called a personal offense. And offenses come easy in life, and they can hurt. When you've had a lot of years of life experience behind you, you've incurred many offenses along the way. It could come from family members, friends, employers, employees, pastors, and maybe even constituents. It could have been over unmet expectations, bad behavior, financial questions, or promises not kept. Every time we think about the offense, it agitates us, we get angry. It's an unresolved issue between us and another person. Some of us have wounds that have occurred many years ago, but we're still carrying the pain. The solution is we need to take the barb off the hook of offense. And we do that with forgiveness. Forgiveness, the decision of granting pardon, ending resentment, and giving up claim to the offense. And it doesn't mean you trust the person, it just means you've forgiven them. And it's not that the offending person is worthy of forgiveness or that we're giving them a pass. It's for our benefit so that we can be released from the painful memory and spiritual bondage. It frees us up rather than keeping us in the bondage to the offense. So the question is, what am I going to do with these offenses? Am I going to live with the pain the rest of my life, or am I going to release it through forgiveness? These offenses can be so painful and complicated that it's just hard to work through them on our own. We need God's grace to help us. God has extended forgiveness to us, so we are able to extend forgiveness to others. Let me pray with you today. Just invite you to picture an offense that may be in your heart or maybe even a loved one. And take that scene to God and say, Lord, I forgive. I release it to you now. Cleanse my heart. Amen.
Members, our guest chaplain for today is Reverend Bruce Shulman from Wilmer Assembly of God Church in Wilmer, Minnesota. Members, if you would please remain standing and join with me, with Jewel and Annika, the proud granddaughters of our very own John Ward, as they help lead us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal for the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th session, 6th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, March 14th, 2012.
If there are no objections, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will stand as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objections, the journal stands as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. Copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there are no objections, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objections, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File 1166.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 1236.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 1774.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2214.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2632.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2638.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2676.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2705.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2775.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File 2793.
Second reading. Introduction and first reading of House files. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. Chief Clerk will read these House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 2890 through 2912.
First reading, House File 2890 through 2912. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I hereby announce that the Senate accede to the request of the House for appointment of Conference Committee on amendments adopted by the House File 382. The Senate has appointed as such conferees Thompson, Newman, and Ladd. Signed, Keller Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate File 1212, 1528, 1542, 1620, 1788, 1917, and 2166.
First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1212, an act relating to health records. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1528, an act relating to education. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Education Finance. Introduction and first reading of 1542, an act relating to insurance. Lewin moves that Senate File 1542 and House File 2441, now on the calendar for the day, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1620, an act relating to eminent domain. Dittrich moves that Senate File 1620, House File 1833, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1788, an act relating to utilities. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Environment, Energy, Natural Resources Policy, and Finance. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1917, an act relating to election. Dabney moves that Senate File 1917, House File 2293, now on the calendar for today, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2166, an act relating to public safety. The bill has been referred to the Committee on Transportation Policy and Finance.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. Fiscal calendar, pursuant to Rule 1.22, Holberg for the Committee on Ways and Means, calls up for immediate consideration House File 2083. The clerk will report the bill. Oh, sorry.
House File 2083 on the fiscal calendar for today, the second engrossment, an act relating to education.
Calling the author of the bill, the member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm proud to present House File 2083 to the body. I'll go through a couple of provisions in the bill. First of all, on Article 1, Sections 1 through 4, this is a Dittrich bill that allows to expand that non-public aid may be cleared to be used for secular uses and materials purchased with state aid.
Representative Garofalo, 1 minute, please. Members, please. You can take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that the Representative Garofalo can present his bill. Be much appreciated by the authors and the members who are paying attention. Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for those members that didn't hear it, I'm proud to present House File 2083 to the body today. I'll outline a couple of the provisions that are included in this bill. First of all, in Article 1, Sections 1 through 4, this is the Dittrich bill regarding the non-public aid portion of statutes and making clear that secular uses still apply for all materials purchased with state aid, and it includes digital technology as one of those expansions. In Section 5, currently under law, due to a technicality, the Northfield School District is designated as 7-county metro area school district, even though they do not have any facilities or school instruction taking place in the 7-county metro area. So this resets that, so the school districts that are located, their facilities, on January 1st, 2012. In addition, in Section 6, it states that the permanent school fund aid payments of more than $28 per pupil, which are currently in law, the growth in those funds will be dedicated to technology. The committee, on a bipartisan basis, supported this bill. We believe that it's important that that we have a permanent use of that fund. There you go. To make sure that the dollars in that are transparent and very visible to the communities. We think this meshes very well with the work that's being done on the Permanent School Fund Advisory Task Force and making sure that we're getting better rates of return on those permanent school fund lands. Article 2 is the Peterson bill that passed off the House floor, reforming our last in, first out policies. Article 4 is Section 5. It grants authority for levy for a lease on administrative space to the Faribault School District. Article 5 modifies the charter school aid payments under last year's omnibus bill. What we did is we accelerated payments to charter schools so that they were paid on a 90-10 rate up until the March 15th payment. Absent this change, the additional funds that we are giving to school districts in the terms of their appropriation by reducing the shift, accelerating those funds into fiscal year 12, the effect of that would be that we could inadvertently in future fiscal years actually be paying school districts above the 90-10 percentage rate at the charter school level. So we're modifying that payment structure to ensure that charter schools are receiving that money as an accelerated manner. Section 2 is the Lemire bill. Currently under law, food service equipment purchases in some instances are actually required to have approval from the Department of Education. This is a mandate that's really not needed in our local school district, and again, on a bipartisan basis, this was supported. Continuing to Section 7 and beyond, this is the part where we transfer from the over $1 billion in cash balances the state of Minnesota has, and we're transferring $430 million, approximately $430 million, into the general fund for uses of reducing the aid payment shift that was passed in previous legislative sessions. Under this bill, it increases our general education aid payment percentage to 70.2. So not only are we banging back the shift of last year, we're also going into the previous legislature's shift that they enacted and reducing some of the shift payments and the debt that is appropriated to our schools. Article 7, Section 4, under current law, we force school districts in some occasions to spend money even when they don't want to from the school readiness and early childhood family education accounts. What this bill says is that if a school district chooses to save that money in their fund balances, under current law we penalize them and withhold aid payments from them. We eliminate that penalty so school districts, if they're saving for a rainy day, if they're saving for a larger project, this is particularly beneficial to those school districts that are small in nature. The percentage doesn't attract well to a small school district. A very small amount of savings could actually result in school districts being penalized. Article 8, Sections 1 through 3, this is the Mariani bill, again supported on a bipartisan basis. And what this does is that if there's a disruption due to a natural disaster or other cause, In terms of the impact on adult basic education programming, it gives the commissioner the ability of that situation to make sure that we don't penalize those districts and gives them the flexibility to retain the funding for factors that are outside of their control. Again, this bill would increase the aid payment schedule to 70.2. It reduces the shifts. Already under the February forecast, we have seen a reduction in the shift of $318 million. This would add $430 million to improve the cash flow for our public school districts. Members, this is a good bill, has bipartisan support, and I'm asking for members' support. Thank you.
Discussion to the bill. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Atkins moving to amend House File 2083 to second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A12-771.
Call the member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Garofalo yield? I'll explain the amendment, but I'm just curious if he'd...
Representative Garofalo will yield. Representative Atkins.
Representative Garofalo, it's my hope that this will be perceived. I didn't get a chance. I just got in after some meetings. That you will perceive this to be a friendly amendment, and that then I won't do they're telling me I should ask for roll calls and all of that. But I'm hoping to talk a little bit here so you have a chance to read it. The essence of it is that, members, all it says is that if we're going to do this, and I recognize that you can read for yourselves, but if we're going to partially deal with the shift and pay back about 17% of it, that we remind school districts in advisory form at least that it's only 17%. It leaves us with less than 1% in our reserve. It's like an 11-day reserve. You know, they always tell you to have 6 months of emergency cash or something like that. If we pay this out, we'll have 11 days worth of emergency funds available to us. So Representative Garofalo, I will pause for a moment to just ask, is this something that you'd consider a friendly amendment that you'd be comfortable sending out to school districts, and then perhaps that may abbreviate my comments a little bit.
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my friend from Dakota County, please allow me the opportunity to continue reading this, and then I'll respond as soon as I'm done reading it, if that's okay. Thank you.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I somewhat, without trying to offend you, Representative Garofalo, I had a 1973 Dodge Dart, was my first car, and when it came time to sell my 1973 Dodge Dart that didn't have a good engine and it had bald tires, I shined it up all real good, and I put it up for sale. And you know what I had when I had shined it all up? I still had a 1973 powder blue Dodge Dart all shined up. Representative Garofalo, with no real offense intended, your budget from the last couple of years is a 1973 Dodge Dart. What you've done with this bill is you've tried to shine it up real good, but it's still the same. And by attempting to pay back a little bit of a shift, what we're going to do is try to put a good face, or that I think Representative Davids likes to use the line about putting earrings on a pig. These aren't even nice earrings. All this bill does is send some money back to the school districts, but my fear is that the school districts are going to be left with the impression that things are hunky-dory at the state again. What your bill does is it leaves the state with less than 1% in our reserves. It also points out to the school districts that the state still has a $1.1 billion projected deficit and still has over $2 billion owed to the school districts. And all it says at the end is making them aware of that. And then it says, just be mindful of this when you do your budgeting. We don't want them to overspend. If they take that into account, that would be, I think, a fair thing for them to do. And Mr. Speaker, it looks like Representative Garofalo has now had it. I'll yield to him yet again if he's still willing to do so, and perhaps he'll just take it as a friendly amendment.
Representative Garofalo will yield. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my friend from Dakota County, you are correct on a couple of points. That it is true that we are increasing the cash balances for the state of Minnesota from the budget that was passed by the previous legislature, as well as the session-ending agreement with Governor Dayton and the legislature. Taking a look at this, I do notice that you have $227 million in reserve, and that's a number that could actually go upward as a result of the November forecast. In addition, I do not view this as a complete advisory for the fiscal situation to our state, so regrettably, to my friend from Dakota County, I'm not able to accept this amendment, and I would request a no vote on it.
Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Roll Call. Representative Garofalo, I would request a roll call.
Representative Atkins requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment.
Folks, whenever a dangerous product is put on the market, it comes with a warning label. A dangerous product that affects children always comes with a warning label. All this amendment does is propose that we tell school districts when we send them this small check that there's still a heck of a problem up at the Capitol. It's very, very simple. We've got this effort. In fact, Representative Garofalo, I think there was a note sent in for you. The Enron people are outside. They're putting together an all-star team, and they've got Tom Petters already lined up and Denny Hecker. And this bill, I think they want to put on as part of their all-star team. This is terrible accounting. All it does is pay back a small fraction, sending a message to our school districts that we are in better shape now than we really are. You leave less than 1% in the reserve, you have over $1 billion deficit, you've got over $2 billion that's still owed to our school districts, and you're shining up this 1973 Dodge Dart and trying to make it look pretty. At the end of the day, by the way, that 1973 Dodge Dart, I couldn't sell it, and I don't think you can sell this bill, no matter what song and dance you may attribute to it. That 1973 Dodge Dart went to the junkyard. That's the only thing that had value, was to junk it. That's what this bill ought to have happen to it, in the very least, if you're not going to provide a warning to school districts when you send out this little bit of money, that there's still plenty of problems yet to be had. One final point, members, and that is, Mr. Speaker, I quote you, that we're going to solve this state's budget by sitting down like a family would at the kitchen table. The only person whose kitchen table we'd be sitting at with this kind of math would be Denny Hecker's kitchen table. He doesn't have a kitchen table anymore. He's sitting around a mess hall in Indiana. This sort of accounting is wrong. It's darn near criminal, if you ask me. To do it under the guise of solving the state's budget is simply wrong. And to do it in this fashion, to try to shine up this ugly old 73 Dodge Dart and send a message to the folks in Minnesota that everything is hunky-dory is just plain wrong. Please vote no. No on the bill, Mr. Speaker. You'd recommend a yes vote on the... You're smiling, so you must be with me. Vote yes on the amendment, vote no on the bill.
Discussion. The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the upcoming St. Patrick's Day this Saturday, March 17th, several of us in the House have prepared some treats in the back, some mint chocolate chip green ice cream, some shamrock cookies, and some festivities and a little laughter and joke telling. But in honor of St. Patrick, I would like all who have a wee bit of Irish, please stand up and be recognized in honor of the Irish and St. Patrick's Day.
Discussion of the Atkins Amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm tempted to ask my friend, Representative Garofalo, who's afraid to play words with friends with me, if he would yield to answer a question. But I don't need to ask you to yield to make the point that truly when there was a different legislature in charge, we also did have a different governor. And so you're very fond of saying what the previous legislature did, what the previous legislature did. But do keep in mind that when you are telling the truth, and I don't know that you always are 100% accurate when you talk about what the previous legislature did, that you are also talking about things that the previous governor did. So if you want to talk about bigger shifts or more pressure on the property tax, you're talking about Governor Pawlenty just as much as you're talking about the prior legislature.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Atkins, I'm tempted to vote for your amendment, but I'm afraid that you really haven't given the right notice and the right advisory So maybe we'll take another run at this that actually gives a real notice, the one that we actually have to worry about. And it shouldn't go to the school districts, it should go to the kids who are attending the schools. And it's not an advisory, it's called an IOU. And we might pass this bill, Representative Garofalo, but we're still going to have a $2 billion IOU. The amendment should say to every school kid in the state that your legislators couldn't get the job done, we owe you $2 billion, we're sorry, and if only we would adopt the DFL plan for paying you back, you might actually have a chance of getting some money. But the Republicans are sending you this nice bill with a big IOU attached. They're still going to owe you $2 billion. They're still standing up for corporate special interests. But Representative Atkins, I think that's too much to add as an amendment to your amendment. But the real warning label here should be going out to the kids whose educations are being shortchanged by this legislature, to the kids who have the distinction of going to school in a state that is number 47th in class size in the nation. Meanwhile, its legislature spends its time debating how to lay off more of its teachers. The warning label should be to the school kids of the state that their legislature is out to get them.
Discussion. Member from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Winkler, actually, that's a pretty good argument. I like the nexus there that this money belongs to the kids. Maybe that means that the money should follow our kids, regardless of where they decide to go, whether it is a school of their choice out of a charter school or whether it's a school of their choice in the private school sector. So I like where that conversation is going, but I'm afraid that this bill or this amendment really does not do what you intend for it to do, which is really to educate kids. I think that's what our reform bills are doing, is helping educate kids. I also think that our school boards and our superintendents are smart enough to know what this money is, where it's coming from, and what has happened since 2009 when the first 70-30 shift that we're dealing with now was instituted. So I don't think we ought to be treating our superintendents and our school boards as children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Representative Winkler would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, sorry, I didn't see you get out of your seat. Representative Winkler, I'm wondering if you could tell me, in the last 10 years, under Republican control or DFL control, has the legislature, under which has the legislature added more money to the per pupil formula?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hoppe, you have me at a disadvantage. I don't actually carry the figures around with me for the last 10 years of the per pupil funding formula. But what the figures we do have in front of us are the $2.4 billion that we owe the school kids of the state, and the other set of figures we don't have with us is the Republican plan to actually make good on that payment. So hopefully we'll adopt a Democratic amendment coming up that will actually pay the kids back, and then we won't have to worry about the last 10 years. We can actually worry about the kids' future.
Member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Winkler. And I don't have you at a disadvantage. I don't have those figures either. But I do think that it's accurate to say that in the last 10 years, in other words, since I've been in the legislature, that whether you look at Republican or DFL control of the House or the legislature, that Republicans, when they're in control of the legislature, have added more money to the per pupil formula than Democrats have. And I think if you really want to be honest with the kids of our state, and you want to talk about IOUs and the kids' future, and you talk about the people and their future and who's added more money to the formula, I think it would be Republicans. Thank you, Representative Winkler and Mr. Speaker.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Greiling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hoppe and other members. You have to look at more than what goes on the per pupil formula. You have to look at who put money into special education, because right now we owe our schools a bill there too that we don't talk about most of the time. We owe our schools $600 million for special education, and Republicans in 2003 agreed with Governor Pawlenty to cut a lot of things, and that included special education. Democrats, when we were in control, put that back, and we increased the inflationary factor for that, which is part of what Representative Garofalo is always crowing about, that he put more money into education when it really was the Democrats. When we had the new Minnesota Miracle that I proposed, it would have increased the formula from $5,124 to over $8,000. virtually all the Democrats voted for that. And I don't recall a single, not even one Republican, there wasn't one, I don't have to say I don't recall, there wasn't one Republican who wanted to help our schools have a Chevy model to catch up with the underfunding that's been going on with our schools since 1984. So please don't get me going on who is the champion in this body, which party for education funding. And that's a typical trick, members, that's used in election years by Republicans. Putting how much money got put on the formula and not counting all the other parts of the formula. But if you just want to count money on the formula, then I think you have to admit that adding $3,000 onto the formula trumps anything Republicans have done. And that $50 on the formula last year that Governor Dayton managed to get was coming out of the shutdown. When we went into the shutdown, remember, Representative Garofalo's bill was cutting education. So you're now only able to say you voted for that $50 per pupil last year because of Governor Dayton insisting upon it. It was part of the agreement. Yes, you agreed to it, but only after you proposed cutting education.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Greiling, had you been standing, I would not have stood. I bow to your experience and wisdom in the education field. Representative Winkler and I, we don't know education. We don't have the facts with us. I was just talking about the per pupil formula. I thought I was right. I don't have any detail with me. I really, truly respect your service to the state and your educational knowledge. And Representative Winkler and I, he admitted and I admit, we're just talking about more political things than the numbers on the formula, and we bow to your superior wisdom. We'll let you and Representative Garofalo carry on this debate. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to point out to Representative Hoppe that even though I didn't have the numbers with me when you asked, it was easy to come up with the numbers pretty quickly. And the information I have is that when you adjust for inflation, since 2008, Minnesota education funding has gone down by $727 per pupil. So we are cutting education in Minnesota, and we are borrowing money from kids. And the fact of the matter is we are undermining our kids' future because we won't do the right thing and actually protect their interests.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And this is going to be a thoroughly enjoying debate for me today. I didn't go to Harvard like my friend from Hennepin County. I'm just a working class kid from Mankato State University who majored in law enforcement, just a regular guy. But I would think with that Harvard education that Representative Winkler that you would be able to understand basic math. But in fairness, you are the man who predicted before the election the DFL caucus was going to have 77 members. So I can understand why members of the body might be confused about your math skills on these issues. But let's just take a look at what this bill is proposing today. What we are proposing to do today is not only pay back the shift of last year, but to pay back the shift that you, Representative Winkler, voted for, to pay back part of that shift. Now, I know in committee you have stated that you regretted that vote. Those were your words. You regretted that vote. And others are correct to point out that there was Governor Peleni was involved in that as well. But Representative Winkler, I'm trying to help you out today. Because as much as you regret voting to increase the debt onto the school children in Minnesota, I'll guarantee you this, you vote against this bill today, you're going to super regret not paying back the debt you dumped onto the kids in Minnesota. The fact of the matter is we are proposing higher cash balances for the state of Minnesota, lower shift payments, lower debt payments for the citizens for the schools of Minnesota, and I'm going to have a heck of a fun time watching you try to convince that bigger numbers are smaller and smaller numbers are bigger.
Discussion to the Atkins Amendment. Seeing no further discussion, a roll call being requested. The clerk will take the roll on the Atkins Amendment. clerk will close the roll. Representative Clark votes aye. There being 60 ayes and 73 nays, the amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Carlson moving to amend House File 2083, the second engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A25.
Members, the amendment has not yet been distributed. It is coming out right now. Has been our custom and usage on the floor. We won't vote on the amendment until the members in the back row have received it. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson, if you'd like to present your amendment during the course of distribution, and then if we have time, we need to pause, we will, but you do have the floor. Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I was having some difficulty understanding what you said, but I assume when you talked about custom and tradition, I would be able to explain the amendment, and then, in fact, I think it's just coming right now, and then at that point, I will, would you like me to formally move the amendment, however?
The amendment actually is before the body, Representative Carlson.
Okay.
What I was saying, we won't vote on it until each member has received it.
In that regard, but I would like to, at the appropriate time, ask for a roll call vote. Members,
Representative Carlson, you can request your roll call vote at this time. Representative Carlson has requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, much of this plays into the discussion that we just had relative to the best approach to paying back the schools. And I think it's fair to say that all of us support paying down the shift and paying back the schools. But taking $430 million out of the budget reserve leaves only $227 million in the account. There is currently $350 million in the cash flow account, which fortunately that part remains untouched. The bill still leaves a $2 billion unpaid balance owed to our schools even after the Garofalo bill would pass. Commissioner Showalter on the Garofalo bill testified that he was very concerned about the cash flow. In fact, we did get cash flow information that indicated that something like 6 out of the next 7 months we would be at high risk, and we are clearly in deficit one of those months, so we go into the negative. So the amendment that's before you, Mr. Chairman, closes corporate loopholes for offshore corporations and uses the revenue to permanently pay off the school shift. Under House File 2083, there is no plan to permanently pay off the shift. When the shifts are paid off, the money goes to the general fund. So what the amendment does is it provides a revenue stream, and it deals with the foreign royalty subtraction of the FOCs, the unitary tax havens, the foreign partnership income. So in total, it raises $194 million in fiscal year 13, $152 million in fiscal 14, and $157 million in fiscal 15. So the fundamental difference here is that it does put a plan in place to pay back the shift. When you talk to local units of government, be they school districts, be they cities or counties, the ability to plan is a vital, important part of their budgeting process. And so with this amendment, by providing a permanent revenue stream until the shift is paid to a 90-10, we do allow the school districts to plan. We do allow them to account for revenue that would be coming in. So, Mr. Speaker, I do have some other comments that I can make, but I would like to make one very important one that I didn't make the other day. I happened to serve a number of years ago with Governor Arnie Carlson on a special committee or commission, it was. There were citizens, former members of or commissioners of finance. He was at that point the state auditor. I chaired the Education Division of Appropriations at that time. And the purpose was to decide for units of government what an appropriate reserve should be. And as you can imagine, that created quite a discussion. We are currently, with the payback, as I understand it, that is already built in current law, going to be at 3%. I think the Garofalo bill drops it down to something like 1%. That commission recommended that units of government should be at least at a 5% level for their reserves. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about cash flow and related issues. So members, I would appreciate your support on the amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if Representative Carlson would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Hortman.
Representative Carlson, I had my little headphones on and I was listening as best I could, but I missed, you said how much your amendment would pay in fiscal 13 and 14. I think you went through the numbers of how much the bill would be paying back. If you could just repeat, I missed those numbers. Thank you.
Yes,
the member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
It raises $194 million in fiscal 13, $152 million in fiscal 14, and $157 million in fiscal 15.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if Representative Carlson would continue to yield for at least one more question. Representative Carlson, I'm wondering, in your amendment, does your payback stop after fiscal year 15, or does the payback continue on into the future?
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yeah, I did happen to mention, Mr. Speaker, that earlier in my comments. That was just an example of currently in the next biennium, but it is a permanent stream of revenue until the shift is paid back to 90-10, which has been kind of the traditional number that's been in place. And then after that, that revenue, unless there was a change in law, would go into the general fund, but only after the shift is totally paid back.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then Representative Carlson, sorry that you sat down again, but just one, I think this is the last question. Then do you know the total value of the payback to the schools in your amendment when you factor it out to the completion of the payback?
Representative Carlson will yield. Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, the total payback would be the entire shift, which currently, if I recall correctly, sits at $2.4 billion.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, thank you, Representative Carlson. So when I take a look at your amendment and try to determine whether I should vote in favor of this plan to pay back the schools or vote against your amendment and go with the Garofalo plan, what I'm seeing is that your plan pays back $2 billion, more than $2 billion to the schools, and the Garofalo plan pays back $430 million, but in order to do that entirely drains the reserves and potentially puts the state in the situation of having to do short-term borrowing. So, members, I think it's pretty clear the Carlson amendment is a very responsible and thorough approach to paying back the schools. I think it's a much better way to address this problem, and I hope that members bipartisanly will support the Carlson amendment.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to point out two things here. One is this basic premise that somehow the Garofalo plan is irresponsible in terms of our overall reserves, and we hear a lot of numbers tossed around here. I just want members to remember that the budget deal that was signed by Governor Dayton last summer actually left $94 million in our cash reserve, and guess how much in our budget reserve? Zero. A total of $94 million in our cash and budget reserves. And I don't remember, maybe the commissioner came down and told us about how much he was going to have to borrow, but the budget agreement that Governor Dayton signed not even a year ago had $94 million in it. And guess what Representative Garofalo's bill leaves? $577 million between our cash and budget reserves. Members, with this bill, we are leaving 6 times more money in our reserves than in the budget that passed last summer, that our governor agreed to. How in the world was he going to pay our bills on $94 million if he can't pay it on $577 million? So this is fuzzy math in the extreme, people. And I would remind you, the argument was made in committee, boy, if we had just raised taxes, we'd solve this whole problem. I got the spreadsheet up right here. Governor Dayton's $3 billion tax increase proposal with a $1.4 billion shift. And do you know how much money his budget proposal was leaving in our reserves? $171 million. We could have raised taxes $3 billion and we would have 1/3 as much money in our reserves as Representative Garofalo's bill is recommending. So the basis, this contention that somehow we're being fiscally irresponsible, is really off the charts. Secondly, we're talking about essentially a $194 million tax increase this year. And members, oh, by the way, this is retroactive to January 1st. So we're taxing people for 3, 4, 5 months of activity where they had no idea it was going to happen. You add it all up over the 3 years that the bill covers, it's $500 million of tax increases. Now, I don't buy into the governor's math about, gee, if you spend $100 million out of state government, you're going to create 5,000 jobs or whatever the number is. But let's assume he's correct. A $500 million tax increase, sucking $500 million out of the private sector, literally could cost tens of thousands of jobs using your jobs math. This is, if there ever was one, a job-killing tax increase. And let's look at who he's going after. Our biggest and best companies. Members, it's not an accident that we have the highest per capita ratio of Fortune 100 companies in Minnesota. You know why it's there? Because back in the 80s, we passed tax structures that favored companies doing R&D and holding their corporate locations here and operating internationally. Isn't that the exact kind of business we want here? So you guys can demonize all of these things and call them tax havens and tax avoidance schemes and all of that. But members, this is a tax policy that works. And in light of the fact that Minnesota consistently ranks in the bottom 10 in terms of business tax policy, for us to mess around with the very tax policies that actually encourage that kind of corporate growth, I think is irresponsible. So the premise is flawed. A $500 million tax increase is the wrong strategy. Members, let's vote against this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Benson J.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Downey, you voted for that agreement. I voted against it. I voted against it because it was irresponsible then. And so thank you for your admission of guilt on that one. But I'd like to have a question to Representative Carlson, if I may, if he would take a question.
Representative Carlson will yield. Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, you know, there are a number of sources of revenue that you list, and I'm looking at just one, and I think it would be useful for the public who are listening to this debate to get a little more detail. And I'm noticing, for example, on the second page under subsection 5C, tax havens, we have a whole list of havens. Just to mention a few of them, we've got the Bahamas, we've got Belize, we've got the Cook Islands, the Cayman Islands, many have heard of that tax haven, Costa Rica, Gibraltar, Grenada, Jersey, that's off the coast of France, of course, Jordan, Lebanon, Liberia, Monaco, Panama, St. Lucia, Tonga, and a whole number of others. Could you give me and the listening public an explanation of why companies put their resources or their company headquarters in these what are called tax havens? What is a tax haven? How does it actually work? Thank you.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Benson, typically what's done is that the company set up a small office in the so-called tax havens, and they run their profits through those offices, and then they pay little or no taxes in those locations. So what they're doing is then avoiding, as a result, paying taxes that other corporations in Minnesota that are doing what I would say the right thing and are good corporate citizens and paying their taxes in Minnesota. So they're avoiding Minnesota taxes as a result of running through those tax havens, and their business presence, as I understand it, in those countries is very limited. A little more than a mailbox and maybe an office.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, and I understand what you were saying here is we have some companies who have set up post offices in these far-flung areas of the world, and they allow them in because they get a little profit by having them there. But some of the companies that are important to Minnesota, let's say Best Buy or Target Corporation or General Mills, do you happen to know, Representative Carlson, whether they also are participating in the tax havens? And if not, could you explain what that does for their competitiveness in the marketplace?
Representative Carlson will yield. Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Benson, I don't know, quite frankly, which corporations in Minnesota are using the tax havens. When I was getting information on the issue, they gave me the total number. So Department of Revenue would have that information. I don't know, quite frankly, if it's public or not. Maybe other members of the body know more of that detail. But the numbers that we got from Revenue were the numbers that I quoted. I would like to say, though, Representative Benson, while I have the floor, that when there's conversation about our corporate citizens here, and we all like to have good corporate citizens in Minnesota, and those Fortune 500 companies, most of those Fortune 500 companies were here before the 1980s. Best Buy, for example, and maybe Medtronic, over those years became Fortune 500 companies, but the others were here, some of them at the turn of the century or maybe even earlier, whenever we began to talk about Fortune 500 companies historically.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, thank you, Representative Carlson. I just think it's useful for the listening public to understand this problem now that many of our homegrown corporations who are good citizens and who do pay taxes here, whether they're income taxes or property taxes or other kinds of taxes, to help support the schools. When we have all these other companies, and we have a whole long list here, you have listed 34 tax havens throughout the world in which these corporations set up a post box, and then they use that little item in the tax code to escape paying taxes. So much of that money, in a sense, then, is being taken from the children. I just think the public ought to understand that we're not talking about here raising taxes on the good corporate citizens of the state of Minnesota. We're talking about people who are skipping out of their responsibility. All the rest of us in here, I believe, pay our taxes. I know I've already turned in my taxes and I've already paid them and have gotten a little refund, and I'm proud to have been a taxpayer in the state of Minnesota, and I'm grateful to have enough income to pay a tax, because I know that it goes to a lot of good purposes, not only to the safety net we always talk about, but to the future of our kids in public education. I just think it's a shame that there are tax loopholes provided by the federal government and all the high-paid lobbyists over there over the last 20, 30, 40 years who have created this monstrosity of a federal tax code to allow those with the most money to get away with paying their fair share when the rest of the citizens of this country feel it is their patriotic duty to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Benson, because that was a very good Q&A you had with Representative Carlson, I just wanted to shed a little bit of additional light on that. You know, this is not public information which corporations benefit from this. And Representative Downey, this isn't something to be taken lightly. These are tax havens that are officially named so by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So they keep an ongoing list. It kind of varies from year to year. Sometimes countries comply with their criteria and standards, and sometimes they don't. So this is the current list. And I appreciated, Representative Benson, that you read from that list. Of course, you left off a couple of my favorites, Nauru, Tonga, Vanuatu. And so these are far-flung islands, often in warm places, although there's some English Channel islands as well. And members, we have a fundamental choice here. We have a fundamental choice of corporate tax loopholes overseas versus funding our kids and funding our schools. So let's make sure that we pay back schools from Alexandria to Zimbrota rather than continue corporate loopholes from Andorra to Vanuatu.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the amendment, Representative Carlson, yield to a series of questions?
Representative Carlson will yield. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, you had made a point of bringing up what would be remaining in the shift to the schools. I am just a freshman, and maybe I understand you had some experience in the previous sessions in finance. Is the remaining amount in the shift more or less after this bill than what it was before I was sworn in?
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Garofalo amendment brings it back to roughly 70-30. I think it's a little finer print than that, a little higher, 71. But anyway, pretty close. If we're rounding it, maybe 71%, somewhere in that range. And Mr. Speaker, when you reference my history there, yes, I did chair a committee that no longer exists. It was called the Finance Committee. And like the discussion that we were having when Representative Downey was up about the agreement that was made last summer, most of what we did when I was at the table with Governor Palente, along with others, the former Speaker of the House and our tax committee chair and so on, those were negotiated agreements with some give and take. Am I one that likes the shift? No. Was it a necessity at the time? Yes. Some superintendents, in fact there's a letter from one of them on the desk today, indicated that if given a choice between cuts or a shift, at least some of the superintendents that I talked to at the time preferred the shift with the understanding that it would be paid back. My history with shifts, quite frankly, goes back to Governor Quee. He was the first governor to institute a shift when we were having some difficulties in the early 1980s. If it's shift versus cuts, I think most school board members and superintendents would tell you they would prefer a shift. But my problem, and the one that I'm trying to resolve today, is that there was not a revenue stream or a plan to pay back the shift. And that's why the amendment is before the body today, so that we're sure to pay it back, and we do have a revenue stream so that we also protect, because that was one thing I was very interested in at the time, and that was making sure we had adequate funds in the cash flow accounts so the state would be able to pay its bills.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Carlson yield to another question in a series?
He will yield. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In regards to the finding revenue, Representative Carlson, I notice on page 2 you've got a heading with tax haven, And I was wondering if you looked into other possible havens, in the CONUS, basically in the continental United States, part of the country, say North Dakota or South Dakota, where someone might have, say, a family trust or other financial, utility or whatever to hide or prevent from paying Minnesota taxes.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
This amendment that's before you is focusing on corporations. And the answer to your question, have I looked at where individuals might have a trust? No. Would that be public information? I'm not sure that it would be, but I would have to look into that.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Quam. The member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm looking over your amendment, and I thank you, Representative Carlson, for your patience. But if you wouldn't mind, if I could ask you another question or two, please.
Representative Carlson will yield. Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Carlson, I'm looking to see what this is. I don't have a number on the section, but on page 11, you talk about the unitary business principle of this, and I think Representative Benson made a very good comment before. The people are listening and maybe getting an education here, and I'm hoping that you might, with all the experience you've had in this body, help us understand what the unitary business principle and unitary business sales are in this bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
I'm getting, that's something that maybe I could have looked into, but I didn't recently, but we've had discussions of that in the tax committee. That's where I think there's an agreement. Maybe I can get some help from our tax committee chair. An agreement where they agree that they will pay the sales tax, for example. And some states have agreed to do that when sales are made, and others have not. I'm speculating a little bit there, so maybe there's others you might want to ask the question.
Member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Well, thank you, Representative Carlson, and no, I think I think it just bears pointing out that we have there's a number of changes on pages 12 and 13 in this bill regarding unitary business principle and unitary sales, and you got this amendment here, and we don't quite understand what's in here. All we know is it's got money in it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to respond to a statement that was made earlier by the author of the amendment. And the author of the amendment said, and I quote, "My problem is there's no plan to pay back the shift." And members, that's not quite true. In fact, state law has a plan to pay back the shift. And the plan to pay back the shift is to have a robust economy. And it's been done before. It's a proven plan. It's worked. We've had shifts before, and a robust economy pays back that shift. Unfortunately, this amendment works exactly opposite of what we should be doing to pay back the shift under a proven plan, because what it does is it puts in jeopardy our businesses, and especially our big business owners. Members, I don't know if you've gotten this little green book. It's a good book to read. Both sides, nonpartisan, tax foundation. Nobody says it's a partisan ALEC organization or anything like that. It's a good book. And if you look in this book, you will notice that Minnesota in 2012 ranks 45th in state business climate. Members, business owners look at this stuff. They are not dumb people. And if we are going to encourage businesses to grow in the state of Minnesota, if we're going to encourage businesses to leave other states to come here, one of their big deciding factors is the state business climate. This amendment works against a proven method to paying back the shift. Therefore, it should be rejected.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S. The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, Representative Hornstein, we do have a fundamental choice here today. The fundamental choice is, are we going to be a success as a state? Are we going to have a successful economy that will allow us to do all the things that we hold near and dear to us as Minnesotans? And that includes the quality of education that we have in this state. But you know what? We can't have that quality of education in this state if we do not have a strong economy. And if we send a message to the businesses today that we want to tack on six new tax increases on the businesses of the state of Minnesota, we are sending a message to them: go away. Go to Wisconsin, go to the Dakotas, go to Florida, Texas, you name it, any other state, but we don't want you here in Minnesota. We have seen within just the last year, by changing the attitude in the state of Minnesota, that we now have a $1.2 billion budget surplus. We took a deficit of $6.2 billion and we turned it into a surplus. And you know how we did that? We did that because we said to the businesses of Minnesota, we want you here. Because we know that you're going to provide the jobs that give people the money to consume and to support their schools in this state. But what you're telling them today is, no thanks, go somewhere else. We don't need your kind here. And quite honestly, this is the wrong approach for our state of Minnesota. We need to be fostering an environment where businesses want to thrive here and provide jobs for our citizens. Because frankly, that's the only way we're going to survive the next couple bumpy years.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to thank Representative Carlson for offering this amendment. Representative Anderson, it's interesting the miraculous powers that the legislature has. You can shut down government for 21 days, pass a budget that borrows $1.4 billion, and suddenly all the businesses in the world think Minnesota is a great place to do business because we do such a great job. You borrowed $1.4 billion, shut down the government for 21 days, and you think that's the big advertisement outside our state that says, come here, we're a great place to do business. That's amazing. Members, the fact of the matter is businesses don't need a subsidy from the state of Minnesota to shelter money in the Cayman Islands. They don't need a subsidy for the state of Minnesota to offshore jobs, to ship jobs to foreign countries. They don't need a subsidy from the state of Minnesota to shelter their money in royalties that come from other countries. They don't need taxpayers' help in order to make money and create special carve-outs for themselves. The people who need help from the taxpayers are the kids of the state of Minnesota who need a decent school to go to, who need to actually have a teacher in the classroom. We don't need to be 47th in the nation in class size in order to be a successful economy. We actually need to be one of the best states in education, not one of the worst. We need to live up to our obligations to kids, not ignore them. The statement has been made on the floor that a robust economy will pay back the shift, but it won't under the Garofalo bill. The Garofalo bill caps the payback at 70.2%. So we're paying back a little bit of money that we owe the kids, but the vast majority of it won't get paid back. And just because the economy grows doesn't mean that shift gets paid back. It's capped at 70.2. You won't pay them back. You don't have a plan to pay them back. And if you did pay them back, you'd have to acknowledge that you shut down state government last summer for nothing. You shut down state government to protect the same corporate special interests that you want to protect today by voting no on the Carlson Amendment. Your priorities are very clear. Protect the very rich, protect corporate special interests, and every kid in the state can go fend for themselves. That's your priority. That's why you're going to vote against this, and that's why you don't want to have a plan, because having a plan would mean making a tough choice to pay kids back.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Just hopefully a helpful suggestion for the author. I actually have a list here of the countries that have come off of the tax haven list, and Nauru and Vanuatu were pulled off in 2003, Liberia and the Marshall Islands in 2007, Andorra, which was referred to, Liechtenstein, and Monaco were pulled off in 2009. So the next time you decide to put this bill on the House floor and kick our best businesses in the teeth around for a couple of hours, let's get the list right.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, if we really had a $1.2 billion surplus, as you claim, we wouldn't even be having this debate on the floor. The only reason you even claim to have a surplus is the fact that you borrowed nearly $3 billion from our schools. You took out tobacco bonds, doing credit card financing for the first time in our state's history, and you continue to perpetuate and you continue to ignore the fact that we face an over $1 billion deficit when we come back in 2013. The fact of the matter is, we're going to be no better in January of 2013 than we were in January of 2011 because of the way you fiscally mismanaged this state. The fact of the matter is we do have a choice, and that's the one thing I'll agree with you on, Representative Anderson. We have a choice. It's clearly about priorities here. And the priorities, as you've been standing up for an hour now, defending corporations over our kids. That's the choice that's before us today. Are we going to continue to allow these corporate tax loopholes overseas to hide money, to not play by the same rules as Main Street businesses, or are we going to actually put in a plan that's prudent, that's going to not drain our reserve, and that's going to actually pay back our kids in full? That's the simple choice we have before us. It's kids versus corporations. You again, just as you did when you shut down the government, just as you did when you passed the budget last year, just as you're doing once again today, over and over and over again, you're standing up for your corporate special interest friends instead of the middle-class folks in Minnesota and our kids, and that's wrong.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I apologize. I missed part of the debate about Representative Carlson's amendment. And members, if we want to spend time on the provisions in this bill, I wonder, Mr. Chair, if the tax chair would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Lincheski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, you've just introduced your omnibus tax bill that attempts to reduce the tax preferences to foreign operating corporations and tax havens. Can you explain to your own side of the aisle what you're doing in the omnibus tax bill?
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Lincheski. We are not doing anything with the foreign royalties. I want to be very clear about that. We are making some changes to the foreign operating corporations, and what we're looking at is offsetting some of that with them being able to take as a credit their property taxes. So it's not dollar for dollar, but we're not touching the foreign royalties, but we are looking at the FOCs.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Lincheski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Davids and members. Before everybody gets real, strident on this issue, I hope you listen to what your own tax chair said. Members, it is undisputably the data shows that the amount of legal ability for multinational corporations doing tax in the unitary business model to take their inputs to their business model overseas and use the tax code to say that's where they're earning their income and their profits to avoid United States and Minnesota tax is overwhelming, so much so that your own chair has a proposal this year. Members, this is something that all of the United States is trying to get their heads around, and Minnesota corporations and lots of non-Minnesota corporations are receiving tax benefits from our constituents. And so this bill is saying, look, enough of that. Let's move the money. This amendment, Representative Carlson's amendment, is instead saying we have a higher priority than these tax preferences for offshore companies, and they are our students. I represent the Bloomington students. I'm really lucky, Mr. Speaker, that I'm a legislator who only represents one school district. And I'm amazed at my colleagues, quite frankly, that they represent 10, 20 school districts. I don't even know how they do it. I represent one school district. That's it. The people of Bloomington. And I absolutely want to prioritize those students and the funding for those students over these models that allow folks to move profits that really are not earned there in a legal model to avoid Minnesota tax. So members, please join, just make a higher priority choice here and support this K-12 funding mechanism over offshore corporations.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I rise under
Rules, Rule 3.21, motions and propositions to be germane. I'm prepared to offer advice.
Representative Dean brings a point of order under 3.21. Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, the Carlson Amendment is not germane to the bill. It vastly expands the scope of the bill, requires a title change, and deals with taxes. This bill, as I'm trying to go through Representative Carlson's amendment and the bill itself, the bill only deals with taxes in a very brief section. 22.13 through 22.24 does not deal with the same section of law that the Carlson Amendment does, which is Section 290. Vastly expands the scope of the bill. Deals with taxes. I'm glad Representative Linczewski got up because I think she probably made the same point that this deals with the tax bill. It's a more appropriate place for this debate to take place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Advice. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would urge you to rule the point of order not well taken. This amendment clearly is germane to the bill in the sense that the only way that this amendment is not germane to the bill is if the borrowing from the reserve, draining down the reserve to pay the school shift, if that portion of the bill is also not germane to the bill. This section of the bill is about how we ought to pay off the IOUs that we need to pay off to our school kids. You chose one funding source, which we think is irresponsible, which drains down the reserve to very low levels. We are choosing another funding source, which is closing corporate tax loopholes on corporations that hide their profits overseas. It's absolutely germane. It goes to how we are going to pay back the school shift, the IOUs that we owe our kids, the $2.5 billion that we owe our kids because of the budget that was passed after the shutdown last year. So it's absolutely germane. It's just substituting one revenue source for another. The only way you can rule it not germane is if you rule that whole portion of the bill not germane because it has a different funding source.
Advice. The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, advice. 2 days ago, Representative Dean moved to table a minority report to prevent the body from taking a vote on it. Representative Dean essentially moved to shut off debate, to avoid a vote, and to obstruct the basic debate and voting process that a deliberative body, a legislative body, is supposed to be about. We are supposed to vote and debate on bills. Representative Dean, instead of having a debate, instead of having a vote, moved to table the Carlson Minority Report. So, when the minority report is tabled, when we are gagged, when we are prevented from having a vote on an issue that's of great importance to the kids in Minnesota, when the gag rule of Representative Dean is imposed on us, 2 days later, the exact same thing is offered as an amendment. And so, and another point of, this time it's not a tabling, it's not a gag order, it's a motion to say it's not germane. It's germane for the reasons that Representative Thiessen has already said. But really, the question for you is, Mr. Speaker, are you going to let your members take a vote on an issue that's important to the people of Minnesota? If you want to hide behind procedural motions to avoid taking a tough vote, you shouldn't be here. Representative Dean, you're doing a good job of protecting the lambs in your flock. But I think they're actually capable of taking a vote. I think they're actually capable of defending their positions back in their district. I bet they'd love to go back and explain why corporate tax havens are so important for everybody in their district that it would be completely inappropriate for us to close a corporate tax haven so that the kids of Minnesota could actually get paid back. I'm sure that they would love to make that case and take a vote, take a position, and stand on it. If Representative Downey is correct, if everyone on your side arguing against the Carlson Amendment is correct, you should be more than happy to take a vote and move on. But instead, today, just like 2 days ago, you're trying to hide behind procedural moves to avoid taking a tough vote. So the Dean point of order, Mr. Speaker, should not be well taken. The amendment is germane, and if it's ruled out of order, it's just a further attempt to stop the minority party from having an ability to offer amendments, to bring issues to the fore, to basically do our job, to bring up points that the majority would rather avoid. And if you want to do that, Mr. Speaker, that's fine. If you want to rule it out of order, that's fine. We've seen a fairly healthy disregard for the rules so far this session. I guess it may continue, but you're really just making a mockery out of the process, out of the legislature, if you don't allow us to take a vote for kids. You shut down a minority report. You want to shut down an amendment today. You're leaving us with very few options to actually represent the kids of Minnesota.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, we kind of will engage in this back and forth on these sorts of issues every once in a while, and there's sort of a preordained outcome. Oftentimes we know that we're going to lose. Your folks know that they're going to win, and we kind of go through the motions. This is not one of those situations, and I would actually, pardon me, Mr. Speaker, but my request would be to the Majority Leader, Representative Dean. This one, Representative Dean, please think about withdrawing. We can call your attention to at least a dozen situations where a different revenue source has been offered, including FOCs. And Mr. Speaker, Representative Dean, Majority Leader Dean, it's fairly common to point to a different revenue source. You both recognize that our highest rule in this body is custom and use. The custom and use in this body with Democratic speakers, with Republican speakers, have been when alternative sources of revenue have been proposed, that is germane. It's a perfectly appropriate argument to make. If we can't rely on that, you guys, what can we rely on? And to go back to that kitchen table, if we truly are going to apply kitchen table rules, when we sit down and my wife and I have a bill to pay, we might look at different places to look. Maybe we got some money in checkings, maybe we've got some money in savings, or maybe we look to get an additional source of income. But it's all relevant to the conversation. It's perfectly germane. And just speaking personally for myself, I will be deeply disappointed if, actually, Mr. Speaker, I'll be more disappointed in Representative Dean than I would in you. I understand that speakers sometimes just have to do what they have to do for their team. But Representative Dean, please think about this one. At least a dozen times in the last 2 years, we've had exactly this conversation, and it has not been ruled as non-germane. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that the point of order not be well taken, and I'd request that Representative Dean please reconsider.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice?
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, being the author of the bill 2083 and having reviewed the A25 amendment, Mr. Speaker, you really have no choice in this matter than to rule the Dean point of order well taken. Clearly, this bill greatly expands, the amendment greatly expands the size and scope of this bill. This is not germane. The question before the body, the question for you, Mr. Speaker, is not about the disastrous effects of this tax increase. It's not about whether job-killing tax increases are what Minnesotans want. The question before you, Mr. Speaker, is whether this amendment is germane. And clearly, the A25 amendment is not germane.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Atkins, if you'd like to state a custom and usage perhaps on a specific date, a specific bill, I would hope that the next time that you rise under that under custom and usage, that you're prepared to do so with some research ahead of time. I'm relying on my memory and the past couple of years, and we could go back and we could find, I'm sure very shortly with some staff work, the instances where that is in fact not the case, because common sense would tell you, custom and usage would tell you, our procedural rules will tell you that if you vastly expand the scope of the bill or that you require a title change, that it is not germane to the bill. This is germane to a tax bill. It is not germane to an education bill. Representative Winkler, the other day, I find your comments somewhat amusing. You say that we're trying to block debate through a procedural motion after about 65 minutes of floor debate on a particular issue. It's probably a longer debate than we've had on the majority of our bills. So I find that just slightly amusing. Also, Representative Winkler, you said the other day that when we were arguing the rules that we were trying to somehow prohibit debate on a bill. I would say bring your bill forward, bring your bill to the floor, bring your bill to committee, bring your amendments to committee, and we will have that debate. We will have the appropriate debate where it fits within the bill. I would welcome your work in doing so, Representative Winkler. And I will tell you that rather than stifling debate. I think we've had it on the floor today. I would like to have this debate continued on, and actually the debate that you're having is the debate that we had last year, which is government big enough or not? You said government wasn't big enough, we had to make it a whole lot bigger. We said it's big enough the way it is. That's what this debate says going forward. Representative Garofalo wants to pay back the shift with the bill that we have before us. We think it's a good idea. You think it's a bad idea. That's fine. But the priorities are important, Representative Winkler, and that's what we're debating here and we'll be debating as we go forward. Mr. Speaker, point of order should be well taken.
The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I was too somewhat amused with my good friend Representative Winkler's comments about hiding behind this and hiding behind that. It probably is the champion amendment as far as being offered the most number of times. I'm not quite sure how many times we've seen it, but I've got it pretty well memorized by now. And, Mr. Speaker, this greatly expands the scope of the bill. The point of order, members, should be well taken. And you know what? As far as running and hiding, when this tax bill comes up, we can't run, we can't hide. It's an up or down vote. But that's where it should be, Mr. Speaker, not on the school shift payback. I hope you will find the Dean point of order well taken.
Members, after receiving advice on the Dean point of order, section 3.21 from Representatives Dean, Representative Thiessen, Representative Winkler, Representative Atkins, Representative Garofalo, Representative Dean again, and Representative Davids, I find the Dean point of order is well taken. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to appeal the ruling of the chair and ask for a roll call vote.
Representative Carlson appeals the ruling of the chair, requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the appealing of the ruling of the Speaker. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the appeal. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 61 nays, the ruling of the Speaker stands as the ruling of the body. There's an amendment at the desk, members, has not been copied or distributed. We will take a brief break while the amendment is being copied before we address it.
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I know you set a brief break. You didn't really recess this, so I just wanted to rise to a point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Going back to a question raised by Representative Banyan, I must have been responding in the typical low-key Minnesotan talk, but I gave you correct information, and I did double-check, and the information I gave you about the unitary tax agreements was correct.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is my first point of personal privilege in 8 years. As many of you know, I'm not a big fan. But today is MS Day on the Hill. And those of you wearing orange, thank you for wearing orange today. And thank you for your support of MS Day on the Hill with our big champion, Rod Hamilton, leading the charge.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Rukavina moving to amend House File 2083 to second engrossment as followed. The amendment is coded RA 12-334.
Call the member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina, to explain your amendment. As with Representative Carlson's amendment, Representative Rukavina, we will not take a vote until each member of the body has received the amendment. Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I apologize for the little delay here because I've been trying to get the amendment and I just got it a few minutes ago. Members, we've been bickering now, I guess, for about an hour and a half on how to pay back our kids for the money that we took from their piggy bank. But it's really no new money. And so what my amendment does is it gives our school kids $168 more a year for the 13, 14, and 15 fiscal year. Instead of Representative Garofalo's, $50 is $50, but where I come from, we would call you at the very least parsimonious, and at best a cheapskate. So, members, if we're really talking here about just giving the money back to our kids' piggy bank that we stole, what we should do is be honest and give them more money, because our education system needs a good shot. Minnesota's always thrived and leaped forward when we've taken care of our kids and put money into our education system on both the K-12 and higher education levels. So, members, it basically goes after those corporations that are trying to hide their money and skirt the system. And I would appreciate your vote, because I think both sides of the aisle want us to take care of our children. Members, I'd appreciate a green vote on the amendment. And I would ask for a roll call vote. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Rukavina requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the amendment. Discussion to the amendment. Again, members, we will not be able to vote, or we will not vote until each member has received a copy of the amendment. Representative Rukavina, to the discussion to your amendment.
Discussion to the amendment. Being that we had green in the back, I would like a green vote from everyone in honor of St. Patrick's Day, too.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see that some copies are being handed out, but we are willing to, because it's online, we're willing to proceed with the debate and get to the vote without waiting for further copies.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I would rise under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions to be germane, and prepared to offer advice.
Representative Dean raises a point of order under Rule 3.21. Advice, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I do have the Rukavina amendment and have reviewed it, and it is very, very similar to the last amendment that was offered that was found to be not germane by the body, and for the same reasons that it does not deal, this portion of the amendment does not deal with the portion of the bill that deals with revenue at all. This is a tax amendment to a tax bill, not this education bill that we have before us. For the same purposes that we debated in the last germaneness argument, I would ask the Speaker that this motion be well taken, that the amendment be found to be not germane to the bill.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Well, Mr. Speaker, advice. Mr. Speaker, the entire bill, the Garofalo bill, deals with bringing some new revenue to our school districts, but it's just revenue that was already promised to them and withheld from them. And this amendment deals exactly with bringing new revenue to our school children, but bringing real revenue, $168 of real revenue for the next 3 years. And so I don't see where the Speaker could rule that it isn't germane. It's exactly what Representative Garofalo is doing, but just being more generous to the school kids.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice.
State your advice.
My understanding is this is an education finance omnibus bill, and I don't think we've ever ruled an amendment not being germane to an omnibus finance bill in any area that actually deals with the subject matter of that education finance bill. What this bill does, just to be clear, is it closes corporate tax loopholes, corporations hiding money overseas. It changes the rules so they have to play by the same rules as Main Street businesses, and it puts $168 on the formula directly going to our school kids. That's what this does. That's centrally germane to an omnibus education finance bill. If you rule this amendment to be not germane, it essentially means no amendments can ever be offered to an omnibus finance bill, and that certainly is not our custom and usage, and it certainly would be limiting debate in a very serious way that really disserves the people of Minnesota.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, my advice is under custom and usage. 2 days ago, Representative Thiessen rose on the floor and gave notice that he was going to be making a motion to reconsider in 2 days, and you ruled him out of order despite the fact that you said that it was on a final report. So custom and usage of the body, Mr. Speaker, appears to be that the rules don't mean anything anyway. So I don't see how you could possibly say the Rukavina amendment is out of order, since the custom and usage for at least the last 48 hours is these rules don't mean anything. Right after we had that debate, the Rules Committee suspended a bunch of rules. I don't know why we wouldn't just go forward without this book at all. You, Mr. Speaker, have been seen to tear this up on the House floor before, and I think you were inspired by your own example of tearing it up on the House floor by tearing it up from the Speaker's rostrum as well. So the custom and usage of the body is there are no rules. The Rukavina amendment has to be in order.
Advice. Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, the Rukavina amendment is a perfectly good argument to have, a perfectly good bill to introduce. It just doesn't happen to be germane to the one that we are talking about, and that is the ruling that the Speaker is being asked, the judgment that the Speaker is being asked to make at this time is it germane? This is germane to a tax bill. It is not germane to the section of the bill, which would be Section 5 of page 22. There's a small portion that deals with this that it does not fit. It would require a title change, vastly expands the scope of the bill. Perfectly good argument, perfectly good bill to debate either here or in committee, but not germane. Would ask that the point of order be well taken.
Members, after receiving advice from Representative Dean, Rukavina, Thiessen, Winkler, I find the Dean point of order is well taken. Member from Hennepin, Member from St. Louis, Representative Rukavina.
Mr. Speaker, I like you, but as much as I do like you, I have to ask to appeal the ruling of the chair.
Representative Rukavina requests a repealing of the ruling of the chair and requested a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Roll call being requested. The clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 59 nays, the ruling of the Speaker stands as the ruling of the body. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2083.
Third reading, discussion to the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do have a couple of questions of the author of the bill, and he was in tax committee as I was this morning, and I asked a question of the chair of the tax committee about the budget and targets. And he indicated that he didn't have a formal target, which I knew as a member of the Ways and Means Committee. There's never been a budget resolution passed. So I asked him if there had been an informal target set, because there have been times in the legislative history when targets have been set informally, and he indicated he did not. So, Mr. Speaker, if Representative Garofalo would yield to a question.
Representative Garofalo will yield. Representative Carlson.
Representative Garofalo, I'm using the term target, meaning, in other words, have you been given a budget number for the viewing audience? That target is kind of an in-house term. But have you been given any guidelines as to the spending level that you have in this bill?
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker and the gentleman from Hennepin, this bill made its way through the committee process and went through the Ways and Means Committee. At that time, and presently the bill remains the same, that we are reducing the debt to our schools by $430 million. Now, whether you call that a target or an unofficial number or an agreement, this bill did go through the committee process and again reduces the debt to our schools by approximately $430 million.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, when budget numbers are given out, those numbers can be up or down. This bill does reduce the reserve, and it should come under some form of guidance, either an informal guidance as to how much you would want in the reserve, and that should be stated at least in the committees so committee members are aware. I can't speak to the K-12 division because I don't serve on that, but I serve on two of the committees where the bill went, taxes and Ways and Means, and there was no budget set. And the reason that that becomes important, Mr. Speaker, is that we have two big spending bills going through, and I talked about this with the members of the tax committee this morning, the tax bill and now this one. And when you begin to look at the combined numbers, and Representative Lincheski fortunately gave us a spreadsheet that showed in the out bienniums what the impact of the tax bill was. And now we come along with this bill here reducing the budget or the reserve by $430 million. And as I mentioned when I had the Carlson amendment before you, That, according to the Commissioner of Finance, puts the state of Minnesota in risk of financial shortfall in terms of paying our bills. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I got the official document on cash flow, as I know you did, Mr. Speaker, because your name, I think, was on it. But the point that was made in here is that we have 1 month where we go into a negative number, and then 5 to 6 months where we're at risk of possibly going into a negative number. And I've always felt strongly that the state should be positioned in a way that we're sure that we can pay our bills without having to engage in short-term borrowing or using on allotment. And that's what's happening, especially when you combine those two bills that are coming through with no budgetary guidelines. So, Representative Garofalo, would you yield to a couple more questions?
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
Representative Garofalo, did you then, in fact, because I raised this question before, ever review the documents dealing with cash flow?
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker and the gentleman from Hennepin, I have reviewed the documents that show that we are improving the cash balances for the state of Minnesota by more than double what the previous legislature and the previous governor passed, and we are in a stronger cash position now than what the DFL majority left us with last session.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we had that discussion earlier, and you know, when you say we're in a stronger position, many of us in this body, as was pointed out, I think by, I think it was Representative Benson earlier, voted no on those agreements because, at least I can speak for myself and say that one of the issues that I was very concerned about with that agreement was the fact that the cash reserves were as low as they were. And some of us had, during the regular session, tried to correct some of that. And the other question I have then also deals with the cash flow. Would MMB, if they have to use a line of credit, have you covered any of those costs in your bill?
Representative Carlson, you're asking Representative Garofalo to yield to that question. He will yield. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Hennepin, first of all, I want to correct your initial statement. I was referring to the cash balances that you voted for as part of the special session agreement, Special Session File 1 in 2010. So the agreement that you negotiated and you voted in favor of in conjunction with Governor Pawlenty and the DFL Senate actually had lower cash balances by more. Again, we are more than doubling the cash balances that you signed off on, to my friend from Hennepin County, just to be clear on that. Regarding the cash flow positions, again, with less than half of the reserves that we are proposing in this bill, compared to when the Democrats were in charge, no short-term borrowing was needed. And the fact of the matter is that when you improve the school's cash position, when you pay back the shift, and you reduce the amount of the shift in the state ledgers, it actually improves the cash flow situation so we don't have these mountains and valleys from the accelerated payments. As the gentleman from Hennepin knows, when you pay back the shift, you are transferring payments from July through October into the previous fiscal year. So this actually improves our situation relative to what the Democrats left us, and in addition, make sure that those peaks and valleys are smoother.
Yes.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Speaker, members, the agreement then that he's referring to was not this past summer, but was one that was negotiated with Governor Pawlenty, and there was a lot of give and take there, but my concerns were still the same that I stated earlier. And now what we're doing is kind of going back to, or should I say kind of, we are going back to those risky policies that took place under the Pawlenty administration. And yes, I was at the table and along with others and advocated for a different approach than what Governor Pawlenty was willing to sign. But the point is that the state has been in a risky situation for several years, and some of us are concerned about trying to correct some of that and to do good budgeting. Members, I distributed earlier for discussion on the bill an article this morning, or an editorial, not an op-ed piece, an editorial in the Star and Tribune. And they raised the very concerns in that editorial that I'm raising here at this point in time and tried to raise earlier, and that is that we are putting the state of Minnesota needlessly at high risk when we are reducing the budget reserve to the level that we are. One final question, if Representative Garofalo would yield to a question.
He will yield, Representative Carlson.
When, under your proposal, would the shift be paid back to 90-10? If you'll recall earlier, I said one of my concerns was revenue stream. I lost on that issue, but I was concerned about the fact that during the special session and now when this bill comes before us, there is not a plan in place to pay back the shift so school districts can begin to do their budgeting and know when they're going to get revenue due them so that they can pass their budgets and provide a good educational opportunity for all of our students that we're all concerned about.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the gentleman from Hennepin. Over the course of the last year, we've seen with Republican leadership the ability now to pay down that shift, to pay down that debt by in excess of $700 million in less than 1 year. So if the Republican recovery continues, that'll be paid off in less than 3 years, Representative. But you should know, I have a bill, Representative. 90-10 is not where we should be at. That is a relic of the past. We should increase that payment schedule beyond 90-10. There's no reason we can't go to 95-5 or 97-3 to fully improve the cash flow situation for the districts of our state.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Representative Garofalo, you're right, 90-10 has kind of been an historical benchmark, and if we were able to get it in even better shape, I would fully concur. Because I told the body earlier that I've never been a big fan of the shift approach. So anything we can do to correct that and anything that we can do to prevent future shifts, we should attempt to do. And that's the unfortunate part of this bill, is that it's not looking to the future. It does not give school districts any information on when they can anticipate being paid relative to the delayed payments, nor does it in any way change the whole philosophy that sometimes has driven us going back to Governor Quee. You know, the shift has been used time and time again, and it's just not the best way to develop a state budget. So, Mr. Speaker, I've raised some concerns about the bill both earlier and currently. And I would hope as this bill moves forward, and I have a feeling that it will, as a result of some of the earlier votes, that if it is in fact taken up on the Senate side, and I understand we've spent a lot of time on this, I understand there isn't even a bill in the Senate, although I was told that there may be one introduced, I guess, early next week, which I find rather interesting this close to the end of the session. A major education bill is still not even introduced in the Senate so that they can begin to respond. But I would hope that you would consider some of the points that the minority here today, as this bill moves forward, if it does move forward and gets into a conference committee or is debated in the Senate, that you would listen to some of what we had to say here today in terms of protecting the financial integrity of our schools.
Member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, we opened this session with reminded by a chaplain about forgiveness, and forgiveness includes reconciliation. So I'm going to do my best to make a bipartisan comment here. Okay. First, I'd just like to say that I don't doubt that anybody on your side of the aisle cares deeply about the children in our school district. I hope you don't believe that anybody on our side of the aisle doesn't care about the children also. In all my time up here, which has just been about 2 years, and all my time on the school board, I can't ever say that I met anybody connected with education or up here at the legislature who didn't care about the children and what happened to them. Okay, so I just want to get that out first. But I'd like to follow that with this comment: is that demographically things are changing. We have our state demographers report by Tom Gillespie. It's telling us that we can no longer operate like we have in the past because the baby boomers are retiring. So whichever side of the aisle we're on, we can no longer operate in a way where we can just tax and spend our way out of the situation. We're in a national and global economy, and I think if we all recognize that, we'll have to recognize that we have to work and operate it differently up here at the state as well as the local level. The other thing I'd just like to comment on is as far as education. I think one of the problems with education is we have either allowed or permitted our schools to become experimental laboratories on our children. And what I mean by that is we have allowed unproven and non-academic educational techniques to be put into our schools with money attached to them that does not increase academic performance and simply increase the cost of public education. I could give you numerous examples, but I'll give you just one, okay? And that's the promotion of so-called whole language or basal literature, which is prevalent in the majority of our public schools. I've had numerous discussions over the year, and I'll be glad to have discussions with you privately after this. But whole language, in so-called inventive spelling, and so-called creative writing don't help our students academically. In fact, they can damage our students' academic ability. The proven techniques are intensive systematic phonics, traditional spelling, and traditional grammar. These proven educational techniques are more cost-effective, they reduce the cost of public education, they allow us to pay our teachers better, and they don't waste millions and billions of dollars over the period of time. So if we recognize these things, get back to true academics, I think there will be plenty of money to pay our teachers adequately, provide for our students, and also to be able to give relief to our businesses so they can compete nationally and globally. Thank you, and Mr. Speaker.
The member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Myra yield?
Who Representative Atkins? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Representative Myra, please.
Representative Myra will yield. Representative Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Myra, I've gone through the bill. It's obviously, 40 pages deep. There was one bill I've been trying to track, and that, frankly, is yours, the one involving the Burnsville School District, and there's been a payout. Rather than have me explain what your bill is, maybe you can just give a little snippet about the bill, and then I'm looking for it. I assume it's in the bill someplace, but I can't find it.
The member from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, no, the bill was taken out. We decided to just go through civil law on the bill. But I can offer you an explanation of the bill. Hopefully we'll be seeing it soon here on the floor. There was a situation in my school district, Independent School District 191, where there was a significant payout of public dollars north of $250,000, and parents and taxpayers alike were very concerned about that money going out. The school district on its website said they were as transparent as they could be within the parameters of the law. And so we have been working through education finance, and now it is in civil law, and we're working through that language to allow for clarity and transparency for the parents and the teachers who are parents and the taxpayers who are paying that bill. Thank you.
Member from Dakota, Representative Atkins.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Myra. I guess it's a terrific explanation. I'm awfully disappointed to not see that in this bill. This has become kind of our education omnibus bill. Representative Chairman Garofalo, that was a $255,000 payment. And all the people want to know, particularly residents of Representative Myra's district, is why. They've provided no explanation for that payout, and to have such things occur is deeply detrimental and deeply disturbing. I'm hopeful that that bill will come before us. I'll be real frank in that there's been a rumor floating around that that bill is not going to come to this floor because you're a little worried about an amendment about disclosure by the Senate and disclosure by this body about payments of legal fees and payments of potential settlements, and to the extent that things that are floating around in the Twitter universe today are impacting legislation on this House floor, that would be even more disturbing than what the Burnsville School District has done in paying out $250,000 with no explanation. I would, on that note, Mr. Speaker, like to call the body's attention to a request that I made of the Senate as well as to the House on that particular issue, and that's why I was so troubled to not see it in this bill. I asked for the copy of the retainer agreement in the Susan Thornton matter and how much has been paid out. And within an hour, I had that information. Greg Hubinger from the LCC provided it almost immediately. I made the same request in the Mr. Broadkorb's matter in the Senate, and have been told that that information is not available, that it's attorney-client privilege. I can't have it. I can't see it. I pointed out to Mr. Ludeman, who told me that in fact I am a client. As a member of the legislature, I'm one of the clients. And to provide it to me, have not heard a word back from Mr. Ludeman now in a couple of days. Those are taxpayer dollars too, Representative Myra, and I would hope that perhaps we could join together in an amendment on your bill perhaps to at least cause the Senate, when we start talking about paying out money, probably tens of thousands of dollars to a law firm at this point, that information definitely ought to be disclosed. Taxpayers ought to be aware of that. They ought to know what's going on. They ought to have access to that retainer agreement, no different than what's happening in Burnsville right now. So Representative Myra and Chairman Garofalo, I'll take you at your word that that was not impacted by the Broadcorp matter, but I would certainly hope that when the bill comes to the floor that we'll have an opportunity to impose the same rules on ourselves that we expect of our school board members to disclose why and how money is being paid out, particularly when it's in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Myra.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Dill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, last year in special session, I did not vote for the bill that did all of this. And I'm not going to vote for the bill today of Representative Garofalo's. And because I just did some quick figuring, and the number of days that the rainy day, I call the rainy day, the cash flow account in the budget reserve keeps us alive is 21.7. So if in November we had a forecast, if the Garofalo bill went forward, and we had a forecast that was around 530, maybe a little more $1 million in the negative, we would immediately be forced into some kind of unallotment or a special session to come back in and balance the budget. Now that, in my estimation, we actually don't have big enough reserves in a cash flow account to start with. And to drain it down, this goes against everything that I was ever taught in school about financial planning. I mean, a family should have at least 90 days of funds available in case the husband or the wife loses their job, or they have unexpected medical expenses, and the state is running, when fully funded, for reserves on 21.7 days. I just can't really see the reason to take this risk. Now, that doesn't even take into account, members, the fact that that's assuming that money were spread out equally over a short period of time, the 21 days. But if for some reason we had payments that were quite large, that number of days would shrink. And conversely, if we had payments during that 21-day period when we were actually at risk, that number would stretch out to a few more days. So I don't see it. We wouldn't do it at home. We wouldn't do it in our business. And I don't think we should do it here. Now, I sure want to see schools funded and kids get the money that they deserve. But this is really about families. And families and dads and moms that are at home right now, probably getting ready to go to their supper table. The worst thing that could happen is that there's a family member that's sick, someone dies, a family member loses their job, and their finances are put at risk. And I just can't see taking this step. So if last July 21st, I believe it was a good plan on the governor's mind and on the body's mind to pass the bill during special session, why is it not a good idea now? We had a good, well thought out, or the people who voted for the bill believed they had a good, well thought out scheme. And now suddenly, because we have some extra money, we're going to pay it out, as we have now, towards the school shift, and then throw another $400+ million on top of it. To me, it just doesn't make sense for that reason, and that's the reason I'm not supporting the bill. Thank you for listening. I doubt if we'll change anybody's minds, but 21 days isn't very long, and with this shift down at around 12 days of reserves is really not very long. So thank you.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I've been listening to this very long debate and have heard a few things that I just simply needed to respond to. First of all, I heard Representative Garofalo a little while ago refer to the Republican surplus, I think he said. You know, that is so misleading, members. First of all, there really is no surplus. We know that. That's the reason we're here today debating the bill that we're debating. There is no surplus. What we have is debt. So it's debt or more debt. It's not a surplus at all. But other than that, if you look at what makes up the improved forecast that we have, a lot of it is on the bottom line from the last budget, the one when the Democrats were in the majority and Governor Pawlenty was the governor. So quit trying to take credit for the little bit of improvement that we've seen. We also know that the improvement is due to the improving economy. Well, you know, that's the national economy that's improving, so maybe you don't want to credit President Obama with that. I'm sure some people don't. But in fact, this is happening on President Obama's watch. We know that here in Minnesota, we really don't make the economy. It's really happening around us and over our heads to a large degree. And thirdly, a lot of the surplus is coming from what was really an overestimate of how much money was going to be spent in health and human services. With the Affordable Care Act now in place and being implemented in Minnesota and the additional coverage, we had forecasts about how many people were going to be on those plans, and those turned out to be too generous. And so now that we're adjusting, MMB is adjusting, they're finding that fewer people are using the services than thought, and so there is more money than they thought there was going to be. So please don't say this is a Republican surplus. Nothing could be further from the truth. Secondly, I heard Representative Gruenhagen talking about education, and I wanted to just respond to that because it's true, Representative Gruenhagen, we all do care about the kids. We all care about education in this body. It's probably the single issue that really unites everybody. But the difference between us is our approach, and in particular what we're willing to do to fund our education system, which we are constitutionally mandated to do. So what are we willing to do? Well, on this side of the aisle, we're willing to tax the large corporations who are swimming in money. Even in this bad economy, they are making money hand over fist, and we hear story after story about the CEOs of the big corporations and how they are just, you know, laughing all the way to the bank. And yet when we try in this body to close some corporate tax loopholes, what we get is basically duck your heads, you don't want to vote on that. We get procedural motion after procedural motion just so you don't have to take a vote to show your constituents what you're willing to do. So now we know what you're willing to do. You're willing to take the money out of the reserves, put the state at more financial risk, to not go into the election saying that you took money from the schools and our children. Members, that is wrong. There is money to be had. It won't harm the economy because that money is not creating jobs. That money is being held in offshore banks. That money is not being spent in our economy, and that is exactly the problem we have. So I think we could very easily ask the big corporations to pay their share, to close those loopholes without hurting our economy at all. But you don't want to do that. So that's the difference. What are your priorities? We all care about education, but some of us are willing to ask the wealthiest corporations to pay to help to meet the needs of our students, which after all is meeting the future needs of our states and actually meeting the future needs of those corporations, because not having a well-educated workforce is going to be a huge problem for everybody. So finally, members, I did also want to refer to something that happened in the Health and Human Service Committee a little bit earlier. I think it might have been yesterday, although the days are kind of blurring together for me right now. But the majority leader was in the Health and Human Service Committee, and he had a bill, and the bill was to get the Department of Human Services and Health and Commerce to expend some resources figuring out what's going to happen if the Supreme Court finds the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, or if we get a Republican president and Republican Congress and the law is repealed. Oh my gosh, what will we do if that happens? He's so worried about it, he's bringing a bill to tell the departments, drop everything. Well, maybe that's not fair. Don't drop everything, but just put some resources toward planning. We're so worried. We want to know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? He's so worried that he's not willing to even keep our resources in our cash flow account, in our reserve account, in case we need those resources. You know, on your side of the aisle, you're all so worried. There have been other bills too. What will happen if the federal government goes bankrupt? What will happen if they can't meet their obligations? What if, what if, what if? And here today, you want to drain our reserves. If you're so worried, members, if you're genuinely worried about what we will have to do to meet our responsibilities and whether we'll be able to meet our responsibilities, then don't drain the reserves. As Representative Dill just explained, it is a very irresponsible thing to do. Very irresponsible, members. And no, I didn't vote for that bill either. Let's not drain our reserves. Let's put this state back on a decent fiscal footing, and let's get money that we can get from a place where we can get it, where it's fair to get it, where it's fair to our kids, where it's good for our future, and show we care by being willing to ask the wealthiest corporations who get plenty out of our state and who benefit from our good workforce. Let's ask them to pay their fair share, members, and close those loopholes and do it the right way. Thank you.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm not going to stand up here and bash anybody. I'm not going to stand up here and talk about big corporations. I think I've heard that now for 14 years about evil big corporations. That one must pull real well, all right? But it blows me away. No, members, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about just some sound fiscal policy. Okay? I'll go back to what I said before and my reason for opposing the amendment by the member from Hennepin County. We have shifted money from K-12 before. It's a budget gimmick I've opposed. As it's a budget gimmick, Representative Carlson has said he opposed. But we've done it. And members, we have paid the shift back. We have paid the shift back by sound economic policy. And we have a law in the state of Minnesota that says when we have a shift, we pay back the cash flow, the budget reserve, then the education shift. If we just follow that policy and put our trust in the working people of the state of Minnesota, those are the ones who brought us surplus. To the member from Rochester, it wasn't government changing policy, it wasn't us changing, shifting money to the federal, it was the hard-working people of the state of Minnesota who have brought us the surplus. And folks, they will continue to bring us the surplus. We just need to maintain sound fiscal policy. Now, the policy we've followed in the past, I've laid out the three principles. We're going to do no harm to businesses, but then we're going to refill the cash flow account, we're going to refill the budget reserve, then we're going to pay back the school shift. Members, last time this occurred, it took the hard-working people of the state of Minnesota a total of 3 years to pay back the shift because we stuck with sound fiscal policy. Now, members, my problem with this bill is a problem I had with my son when he was playing football in high school and he got injured, hurt his knee. And he went to the doctor and the doctor gave him a rehab plan. Said, you've got to take this long and you've got to do these steps. Right? But you know how kids are, they get so anxious and they want to get back on the field, they want to get back out there. Right? So an injury that should have taken him about 3 months of rehab, he's back on the basketball court in 2 months and re-injures the knee. And now he's out for the entire basketball season as well. Right? No patience. No patience. Now I know in this body, and you're going to see on this board with all the green votes, that both sides of the aisle care deeply about our children and about education. So they're going to vote green. They're going to vote green. But I'm telling you, I'm giving you a warning that we are breaking sound fiscal policy because we are now shifting the order. We are not going to demonstrate state budget policy because right now, cash flow, budget reserve, pay back the shift. We're going to say no, cash flow, pay back the shift, then budget reserve. And what happens when the state doesn't bring in the money, right? We don't have the reserve. It hurts education again because we'll probably have to go back to a shift. Right? We need patience. We need patience to let current law work. If we do that, the working class, the hardworking people of the state of Minnesota will get this ship righted again, right? And we won't be facing this problem in the next 2 years. We'll be back on the right track using current law, current practices. I'd encourage a red vote.
Member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, I too would encourage a red vote. I just needed, Mr. Speaker, to set some of the records straight. We're going to hear over and over again, I think, during this session from Representative Thiessen and Representative Liebling and others that there's just no way Republicans, I'm speaking to my friends over here on this side of the, you know, we have nothing we can claim for ourselves here. We had nothing to do with balancing this budget, with bringing down the spending in the state of Minnesota. We had nothing to do with getting to the surplus that we have right now. That's exactly what the state reported it as. We all know that it's helping backfill the account that was raided, by the way. But let's talk about the facts, can we please, members? What happened? In 2007, when I came into this legislature, we inherited a $2 billion surplus. And within 2 years, we were into a $4 billion and then $6 billion deficit. A $6 billion deficit. So when we come back into the majority after 4 years in the minority, we inherited a $6 billion deficit. And members, in less than 2 years, that turned around. Did the economy improve? Yeah. It's not happening fast enough. Did that help? Sure it did. But let's talk about what was happening with state spending, growing twice as fast as our economy. Under the DFL majority, I'm glad we got the minority now, but the DFL majority, it was promises we can't keep with money we don't have. More spending driving us deeper into the hole. And so what did we have to do when we got the majority? We had to dig out of a $6 billion deficit. The proposal from the DFL was to increase state spending more than 20% in the midst of a $6 billion deficit and a deep recession. That's what we heard from this side of the aisle. From our side of the aisle, tough decision making, responsible budgeting. a reduction of the increase in state spending, not a cut. We continued to increase state spending, but we reduced it below 10%, down to 6%. Trying to get it down to a reasonable level, the same level that businesses, job creators, families have to deal with. But members, please remember, we're going to be lectured over and over and over again during the remainder of this session how we can't claim any credit for that. We just have to remember that all that hard work, all of that fiscal responsibility hasn't helped our economy, hasn't helped get anybody back. You know, these foreign operating corporations, the loopholes, the filthy rich people who create thousands of jobs in our state, invest millions of dollars in our communities, including education. Talk to Boston Scientific. Talk to Medtronic. Ask them about the opportunity cost. It isn't what you think. It kills jobs. So members, we have this choice before us, as we always have. Grow government at twice the rate of your economy. Grow taxes. Find them anywhere. Now it's the corporations again. It's the wealthy. It'll be the middle class. It'll be your grandma. It'll be your next door neighbor. Just find more money to grow government twice as fast as our economy, and all will be well. Members, that's what we got to keep in mind, because we'll be reminded of that over and over and over again. Instead of living within our means, bringing state spending down, getting off the backs of our job creators and out of their back pockets so they can hire people. Not put more people on public programs, but hire people so they can do for themselves and their families. So we can invest in education. So we can invest in our communities. I don't know about you, but that would be my suggestion. Let's grow our economy. Let's help our job creators build jobs so people don't need to turn to government over and over and over again. Promises we can't keep with money we don't have. I would add, Mr. Speaker, just to remind people, since I'm trying to set the record straight here, the budget that we passed off the House floor last session required no education shift. It didn't even require the $2 billion shift we inherited from the DFL majority. It required no shift. It was when the governor and the DFL insisted on even more spending that we had to turn to these other things. And so now we're just trying to work that back. We're trying to get that money back. I've been told over and over again, get the school shift money back. We shouldn't borrow from our school districts. So let's do it. Let's do it, members. I urge a red vote.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Gauthier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Gavel, I'll give you some credit for balancing the budget. And you did it on the backs of the elderly in nursing homes. You did it by cutting wages to personal care attendants. You cut people off of human services. You eliminated the homestead tax credit. And you reduced the rental credit to the poor and low-income people of this state. So I'll give you credit for that. I can understand why you want to pay this shift off. I think we all want to pay the shift off. But you made a bad deal. And the governor is willing to say he agreed to that bad deal and he's willing to live with it. But you want to run as fast as possible from it. And I'm just absolutely amazed that I find myself in total agreement with Representative Biskins saying we have a plan. It's called pay off the cash flow, do the reserves, and then the shift. But you don't want to do that. And then when we come and ask you to take a look at another plan, we're told we're not germane. And then I heard Representative Downing say, you know, get the list right if you're going to kick our best businesses in the teeth. Well, the best corporate citizens of this state are willing to pay their taxes and invest in Minnesota and in the children of Minnesota. And they talk about it all the time. I heard it in Transportation Committee last night that we need workforce development, we need to educate our kids, we need to prepare for the future, and yet somehow they're willing to ante up, but you guys don't want to do it because you want them to run off to the Cayman Islands and God knows where to avoid paying their fair share and being responsible citizens of the state of Minnesota and in investing in our community. It's called a social contract. And everybody is involved, including corporations, and they don't get a free ride. So I can see why you don't want to discuss that. You know, because we might have to talk about a little social justice and what's fair here. Let's kick people off of welfare and let's deny them a benefit because they might have a cigarette addiction. But we can't ask the best corporations of Minnesota who are telling us we need to invest, we need to invest, we need to invest, and we're willing, we can't ask them to do it. I just don't understand it. You claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, and all I've seen is one irresponsible choice after another. You've borrowed on the backs of our kids. You borrowed the tobacco money away to address the issue of addiction and death and health care in this state. You threw that away. You're borrowing from the kids, and you don't even want to say we owe you. And now we're going to be fiscally irresponsible and drain the reserves that the governor has done the right thing for. And I bet you businesses will look at that and say, I don't want to come to Minnesota. They're too risky. They don't have their financial house in order. We need to follow the plan outlined. Cash flow, reserves, shift. And if you want to pay the shift early, then you need to come with revenue and you need to take off the cash flow and the reserve off the table and find another way of doing it.
The member from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Tilbury yield for a question?
Representative Myra, Representative Tilbury does not appear to be on the House floor.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Benson J. yield for a question? I'd appreciate it.
He will yield. Representative Myra.
In education reform, we discussed the bill of eliminating the policy of last in, first out. And Representative Tilbury talked about mischief. I was hoping I could ask him the question, just to refresh my memory. Who was going to cause the mischief, and on whom would the mischief be caused?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Benson J.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Myra, could you discuss that a little more? Since this was a question to Representative Tilbury, I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
Representative from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Am I causing that? Mr. Speaker, when I guess it was about a month ago, we debated the issue of LIFO in education reform. And Representative Tilbury talked about mischief that would be played if that bill was passed. And I was wondering, since it's been such a long time, if he would refresh my memory, who would be causing the mischief and on whom the mischief would be caused. Representative Tilbury, would you mind yielding to the question instead of...
The member from Anoka will yield. Representative Myra. Member from Anoka, Representative Tilbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Myra, if you recall, that was not my words. That was actually Mr. Aronson's words. He said that in a meeting when he answered Representative Benson's question. And when the idea is, when a school district decides on seniority, because it's based on the wages sometimes, a lot of times some of those administrators could say, well, let's let people go that are more costly. That could be mischief. Or let's change a program and then the next year we'll add the program back in. That's mischief. Things that are not illegal, but you would look at it and say, now that's not fair. And so I think that's what he meant by mischief. And I wanted to flesh that out also. Mr. Aronson, what do you mean by mischief? And that's how that all went in the committee, and that's why I struggled with the answers that were given that day.
Member from Dakota, represent Myra.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Tilbury, I appreciate your answering the question and refreshing my memory. And I wanted to confirm that I agreed with you. There will be mischief played with this bill. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Peterson B. yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Myra.
Representative, when we were in that discussion in education reform, you mentioned that there was some kind of safeguard for the individuals that would have mischief played against them. Could you refresh my memory on that, please?
The member from Anoka, Representative Peterson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Representative Myra, actually the fact is that discrimination based on compensation is already illegal. And just to clarify, actually, Representative Davids offered an amendment on the floor just to clear that up.
The member from Dakota, Representative Myra.
Mr. Speaker, members, I agree that there might be mischief between adults. And I also appreciate the comment that it is illegal to do that. Nevertheless, I am voting green on this bill, and I would appreciate being able to explain to you why. My first language was Spanish, and when my family returned to the United States when I was 6 years old, I struggled in reading. I struggled in first, second, and third grade. When I entered fourth grade, I had nil reading skills. There's a very important transition that happens between third and fourth grade. Before the end of third grade, you're learning how to read. Once you are in fourth grade, you're using reading to learn. And I simply had no reading skills. My fourth grade teacher dealt with me by instructing me to get answers from other children. Fourth grade went by, and I gained no reading skills. I entered fifth grade with nil reading skills, but that year I had a phenomenal teacher that changed my life. She saw potential in me. She told me to work hard, and she gave me hope. Her name was Miss Keller. She was not new to the profession, but she was new to our school district. I still remember the day she told our class with tears in her eyes that she was not coming back. There was unbelievable, everybody in the class was just stunned. I had gained 5 years under her teaching. I left that class with fifth grade, ninth month reading skills. The average in the class was 2.5 years of reading gains. Everybody had gained at least 1 year. Even as a child, I remember thinking, this makes no sense. My teacher who changed my life, gave me a future, was no longer going to teach in our school. She moved back to New York. My fourth grade teacher that abandoned me to illiteracy and frustration, quite honestly, hell, still taught. Mr. Speaker, members, what happened to Miss Keller was not mischief. It was a terrible wrong. Mr. Speaker, members, what happened to the children after me who did not have the benefit of her teaching? It was not mischief. It was a terrible wrong. What I had to put up with in fourth grade was not mischief. It was a terrible wrong. I've heard some people say you're moving too fast on this issue. Mr. Speaker, members, I was in fifth grade 45 years ago. No, we need to move on this issue. Please join me in voting green on this bill.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, today, what we really are voting on is really a choice. It shows, this debate again shows the lengths to which the Republican majority is going to go to protect corporations and corporate special interests. Representative Garofalo and others continue to defend bad budgeting, to play the shell games with our budget that got us into this terrible situation, and to defend draining our reserves, something that makes absolutely no sense. Republicans spent an hour on this floor trying to explain why protecting corporations is more important than paying back the school shift. Republicans voted today to protect corporations hiding money overseas instead of investing $168 per pupil in Minnesota kids from Albert Lea to Grand Rapids to Crookston. Once again, you're making a choice in this bill and in the way that you've treated the amendments that we brought forward, the alternative plan that actually protects Minnesota kids instead of corporations. You made a choice to choose corporations instead of our kids in this state. And all I hear from Republicans today is looking backwards, debating the past. Our amendments were about looking forward to the future and putting our schools in the right direction on a path to success in this state. It's time that we change our priorities, members, change the priorities that have been the dominant feature of this Republican majority for 16 months. We shouldn't be all about protecting corporations. We shouldn't be all about getting out of the way of corporations. What builds our economy, what's going to build a prosperous state, is a strong middle class with opportunities for everyone. And you took a pass on that today. You chose to defend the corporations instead of protecting our kids. It's just wrong, and we should vote no on this bill.
The member from Dakota, the author of the bill, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as always, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to be in a position to present this bill to the state of Minnesota and to this chamber, and I do not take it for granted, and give thanks to you. Well, Representative Thiessen, I don't know what happened in the last week. I was reading online when this bill first got posted, and it said DFL House Minority Leader Paul Thiessen says they're open to the option. So what happened, members? What happened? You know, there's a message today. This is what people need to know. Republicans have a plan. Republicans have a plan to reduce the debt to our schools. That's what you heard from Republicans today. And what did you hear from Democrats? Phony, baloney excuses for not paying back the debt they took out on the schools. They voted for this. They voted to borrow money from our schools, and now they won't pay it back. You know, but members, today is a day to give thanks. It is a day to give. In the past, we used to have a joke about a former member. He used to stand up and he'd say, "It's a sad day in Minnesota." He used to say it was a sad day in Minnesota. Forecast for frowny faces. But you know what today? Today's a good day. Today's a good day to give thanks. And the first thing we want to give thanks for, we want to give thanks to the voters of Minnesota. We want to give thanks to the voters of Minnesota for sending Mike Benson to the House of Representatives and replacing Andy Welty. We want to give thanks to sending Pam Myra to the Minnesota House, replacing Will Morgan. We want to give thanks to sending Mike Lemire and replacing Al Doty. And what they're doing today, what those members and every other first-term member is doing today, is they are paying off the debt that those former members left. Paying down on that debt, paying down on that credit card they left for the state of Minnesota. We heard a lot of noise about cash balances today. The fact of the matter is, these members are leaving the state of Minnesota better when they found it. More cash in the bank, lower debts, lower shifts to the schools of Minnesota. But you know, those former members who lost last November, it's not too late for you to learn from their lesson. They made a mistake. They followed the liberal urban leadership off the cliff. And what happened? Who paid the political price? No one from Minneapolis. No one from St. Paul. They easily get reelected. Who paid the price? It was the suburban and rural Democrats. That's who lost. And members, today you got a choice. You got a choice. You can vote to reduce debt to our schools, or you can vote against paying back debt that you charged up on the credit card. The choice is clear, members. Members, there's some great reforms in this bill, but the fact of the matter is this. When you have cash on hand, you pay your debts. Today, pay off your debt to the schools. Mr. Speaker, I urge a green vote.
Signal for the discussion. Clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Calendar for the day. First bill on the calendar for today is House File 1524. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1524, number 7 on the calendar for today, an act relating to education.
Call the member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, 1524 is a bill that was brought to us by both the principal associations, and basically it's pretty simple, members. Basically, in circumstances where there are short-term substitution assignments for principals and assistant principals, it would exempt them from the continuing education requirements that would otherwise be required. These are very short-term assignment, 15-day assignments. This is in conformance with a similar statute in regards for short-term teacher assignments. Members, this is admittedly a rare circumstance, probably a circumstance that pops up more often in small school districts and rural school districts, where their pool of choosing for someone to be able to provide a substitute function for the principal position is a small pool. And again, members, this is a short-term assignment. For anything longer, we certainly want to have those requirements in place for these leadership roles. And so this will be a help to, particularly for many of our small school districts. There was no opposition expressed to the bill in committee, and I would appreciate your support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1524.
Third reading, discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. The Speaker votes aye. There being 132 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed. Its title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 2078. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2078, number 8 on the calendar for today, an act relating to education finance.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Dittrich, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I'd like to do is offer the A1 amendment.
Representative Dittrich offers the A1 amendment. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Dittrich moving to amend House File 2078 as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Dittrich, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. The A1 amendment will be a little bit more clear once we get into the bill, but very simply what it does is it takes the word software and other technology that may be used in non-public schools, and it clarifies that the software and other technology must not be secular in nature.
Discussion to the amendment. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. Representative Dittrich, to your bill in the order of the author.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Helper. What House File 2078 does is it defines software and other educational technology, along with the fact that it allows non-public schools to spend their non-public pupil textbook money on those items. And it just provides a little flexibility for the private schools in the state so that they can use their textbook money for software and other educational technology. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will stand for questions.
Seeing no other amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2078 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. Clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 1708. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 1708, number 10 on the calendar for today, an act relating to youth.
Calling the member from Clay, Representative Marquart, to read to your bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. And I'm enthused about this bill as far as the possibility for youth around this state. And what this does do is it creates a Minnesota Youth Council, and within that, a legislative youth advisory committee. And what this will do is provide a more formalized, institutionalized, more of a direct voice for youth into the legislative process, but just as important, create a direct connection of legislators to youth. And the way it would work, and there's 12 other states, at least as of 2009, that have youth councils formalized, but it would be under the auspices of the Minnesota Alliance with Youth, which is a group that was set up in 1997 with America's Promise. If you remember, General Colin Powell established America's Promise, and since that time, it's been chaired or co-chaired by every lieutenant governor since Joanne Benson. And so there would be students from every area of the state. They would actually come down here and meet. They could hear bills if they wanted to. They could propose an omnibus bill through a legislator. They could advise on bills. And so what it does, it really takes youth involvement from coming down here with meetings or class projects to a direct voice under the dome. And it gives members here a direct connection to youth. So, members, I would ask for your support and take any questions at this time.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the Chief Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1708.
Third reading, discussion to the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will...
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. Member from Scott, Representative Biskins, a little crowded back there.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield to a question?
Excuse me?
The author yield to
He
a
will
question?
yield, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, looking, and I see some numbers here, how many youth in the state of Minnesota are going to have this opportunity on an annual basis?
Member from Clay, Representative Marquart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Biskins, it would be 4 members from each of the 8 congressional districts plus 4 members at large for a total of 36. Their ages would be from 13 to 19, and 2-year terms for those members.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the representative, well, I'm not going to do that. That's silly. All right. I got to think. Between 13 and 19, we probably have a couple 100,000 public school students in the state of Minnesota. If we throw in private, probably brings it up another 50,000 or so. This is good stuff. This is good stuff that every student in the state of Minnesota should be learning. And I don't, they are learning. I'm not going to say should be. I know social studies teachers. I was one for a brief bit of time, all right? I want to say I recovered and went back to mathematics. Good thing, all right? But, I'm not sure we need to write this into law. All right. We have youth coming down here all the time. We have simulated legislatures in the school. It's a cool idea. It really, really is. All right. And I hope there are service organizations and communities throughout the state of Minnesota who will take on this challenge. But to actually write it into statute, just my 2 cents is a little overboard. So I'm going to vote no.
Member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Representative Marquart, one of the things I heard you say, if I heard you right, was that they would be proposing legislation. Would the member yield?
Representative Marquart will yield. The member from Clay, Representative Marquart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Gruenhagen. I probably didn't phrase that correctly. They would come up with suggestions for legislation, then go to a legislator to actually introduce that.
Member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Hey, I certainly applaud getting children as young as possible aware of our legislative procedures and how government works. That's a laudable goal. The problem that I've seen that gives me a little bit of pause is at a local district sometimes, students are sometimes used by the government institution as a tool to promote their agenda in the public. And that's the one thing that gives me pause about your bill. If you'd like to respond to that, Representative Marquart.
Representative Marquart will yield. The member from Clay, Representative Marquart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Gruenhagen, you bring up an excellent point. And the group that takes the applications and would be making the appointments is the Minnesota Alliance with Youth. And they have been, like I said, they started back in 1997 with America's Promise, and they get students from throughout the state. And this is not a mock legislature. If you really want to know how that works, talk to Representative Pawlowski, because he does an excellent job with that in Winona where he teaches. This is not that. This is actually students representing all parts of the state coming down here and actually having a direct input. I mean, it would be this group that would be representing the voices from youth around this state. And right now, while all of us legislators are out talking with youth, it's not formalized, and it just isn't really institutionalized. And the way this would actually work is this says that at least twice during the year that they would meet in a committee room. I mean, it could be room 200, whatever room that might be. And if there's certain legislation that involves youth issues, they could ask legislators, would you appear before us, and actually really get them to be part of this. But I think another big part would be that we as legislators would have at least a couple times during the year where they would be down here. You could talk directly to representatives representing youth throughout the state. So I understand your concerns. This group, though, Minnesota Alliance for Youth, is plugged into 500 organizations around this state. And like I said, it has had bipartisan support. Lieutenant governors, Republican, Democrat, have co-chaired this group. And what's nice about this is we can plug into this group, and there's no state cost to this as far as this council. And I just think it would be a great opportunity for youth. Thank you.
Member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Representative Marquart. I applaud your desire. I just think it could be done more on a voluntary basis rather than statute, so I guess I'd have to agree with my colleague, Representative Biskins, on this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 95 ayes and 36 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 2291. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 2291, number 11 on the calendar for today, an act relating to education finance.
Call on the member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, House File 2291 is a bill having to do with ABE providers, and it basically would hold them harmless for loss of student contact hours when a natural disruption or a major a natural elements disruption or a major construction disruption occurs, producing momentary loss in student participation. Members, this is a big deal for districts around the state, particularly those that are prone to tornado disasters, to flooding disasters, and also in districts where you may have super big major construction projects happening, like here in the metro area. Those projects can momentarily lower the student participation rate, and under the formula, if those districts can't maintain a certain student contact hour, they can then be penalized prospectively in terms of the funding formula. And but nonetheless, once the disaster is over, they go back to their normal student count. But because they've lost the funds, they don't have the capacity to meet those student needs, rather. There's nothing in this that's automatic. However, the bill sets up a process by which the program providers have to make the case to the Commissioner and Department of Ed. They would have to show that, in fact, there has been a disruption, a momentary loss of student contact hours, and then also that they made strong efforts to mitigate that. The ABE appropriations statewide are fixed, so this would be a revenue neutral impact on our end at the state appropriation level, and there's a very minimal of any effect on other programs around the state. Areas that in the past, immediate past, have asked the department for some help, relief with this include communities as diverse as Crookston, Moorhead, so the whole Red River Valley area where we've got annual flooding happening, Mankato, Osseo, Wadena, and Minneapolis last year with the tornado that went through the northern part of the state. So members, it's a good bill. It's got good protections in it. It'll allow us to continue to have these ABE programs continue to provide services. This is a righteous thing both for the students, but also, frankly, for many of our local businesses who really depend on the skills that are developed, particularly the English language skills that are developed by these students at the ABE programs that they can then utilize in terms of local businesses, being able to hire folks to do mostly service jobs and retail work. So members, we had a good discussion about this in committee. There was no opposition to it, and has widespread support in the state, and would appreciate your support.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2291.
Third reading. Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Representative Mariani, thank you for this bill. Living in northwest Minnesota, I've experienced the floods in Roseau and Thief River Falls, the area that I represent, and over to Hallock. And they really do cause a disruption when bridges are closed between two states, when people are having a difficult time with transportation, getting to and from the ABE sites, excuse me. This definitely does impact. In 2002, we had a bad flood in Roseau. Of course, everybody knows about the 97 flood that resulted in up to a month or more of disruption in people's lives. So this is a great bill. I urge a green vote. Thank you very much.
Member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author yield to a question?
He will yield, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, you used the word students, and that's very appropriate, I guess, but these are adult students. Are these adult students and their programs subject to the same school start rules as our public K-12 schools are subject to, i.e. we can't start before Labor Day?
The member from Ramsey, Representative Mariani.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Biskins, I don't think that they are subject to the Labor Day provision.
Member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Mariani, I agree with you. I don't believe they are either. In fact, I think the vast majority of these use flexible scheduling, and some are year-long programs. All right. My concern with this bill, members, is simply if a K-12 school has an extraordinary number of snow days during the school year, they either face losing aid or extending the school year into the summer, and it happens all the time. All right? There's no such requirement here to programs that are, for the most part, run year-round. Right? I guess there are things they can do. They can once the school's back up and running, they can add an hour onto the day for the remainder of the year. If that doesn't bring in enough time, they can add days onto the program. I guess I understand the hardship. I really do. Right? But I also understand that every lost minute in a classroom is lost learning. We hear that all the time. And if we're saying, they can go up to 200 hours, no, I'm not sure what's that. I could look, but up to X hours, well, then you got to say, well, were those frivolously used hours in the first place? That they're not necessary for the learning of the program, and I don't believe they were. If they were frivolously used hours, we shouldn't have been paying for them in the first place. Right? So that's my concern with the bill, that's why I'm going to be voting red.
Discussion. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I would urge a green vote on House File 2291. Members, it's very common in law right now when we have natural disasters that the result of the declining enrollment in our public schools, that we actually offset that. We want to make sure that they are held harmless as a result of these events. The Mariani bill is very reasonable, it's well designed, and I would urge a green vote in support of it.
Member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I, too, would urge a green vote. I appreciate what Representative Biskins says, but I think the very introduction of his remarks hits it right on the spot. It's flexibility, and many of our young learners or old learners who enroll in these adult basic education programs set a kind of a contract for themselves. And within that flexibility, they try to earn their credits, their hours, so that they can move into the workforce. And so I think that's probably one of the main reasons that we want to take a look at some of the disasters that have occurred and interfered with these programs, because it's really set our young adults, older adults, whomever's enrolled in the programs back because they haven't been able to get in the job or the workforce. So I recommend a green vote. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, clerk, take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. Representative Woodard votes aye. There being 129 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Call the member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move the calendar of the day be continued.
Representative Dean moves that the calendar of the day be continued. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Motions and resolutions. There are a copy of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there are no objections, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objections, the motions prevail.
Ward moves that House File 157 be recalled from the Committee on Veterans Services Division and be re-referred to the Committee on State Government Finance.
Call the member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's my motion. I've already talked to the chair of the committee, and he's said that's okay. So I would ask for support on that.
Discussion to the Ward motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Abler moves that House File 2602 be recalled from the Committee on Health, Human Services Reform and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance.
Calling the member from Anoka, Representative Abler, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill was heard as an amendment to a bill in the Health Reform Committee, and it's been carried along. It's going to need to get the finance by itself, and that's where it's going. So thanks.
Discussion to the motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Abler motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Abler moves that House File 2728 be recalled from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration and be re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Finance.
Call the member from Anoka, Representative Abler, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is a department bill, but it was rejacketed after it was done timely by a request from a member of the Senate who wanted a brand new version, which slowed it down, and which is why it was late and why it wound up in rules. So this bill needs to be moved, and so thank you for that.
Discussion to the motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Liebling moves that House File 2683 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and re-referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform.
Call the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, this is Representative Gottwald's bill. It's a bill that has to do with health insurance. As I read the bill, I think it has to do with an exchange, a health care exchange, which, as we know, is a big topic right now under the Affordable Care Act, and whether Minnesota is going to have an exchange or not. I've had a little discussion with Representative Gottwald. I know he says that it doesn't, but you know, I think that bills like this that have to do with health insurance, which this does, generally go to the Health and Human Services Reform Committee, which is Representative Gottwald's own committee. So that is my motion, to send a health insurance bill to the Health Reform Committee. Thank you.
Discussion. The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, I would encourage a no vote on this, and nice and loud from the side of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, this bill is, for one, it's not about an insurance exchange at all. It's about creating a trust account that pools contributions for payment of a health insurance premium. It is purely commerce. There are some tax provisions. It's currently in the tax committee because of some tax deductibility associated with contributions to the premium fund. But this is a unified personal health premium account, not an exchange, has nothing to do with health care reform whatsoever. And I would urge a no vote.
The gentleman from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. I hope you're listening very closely to what Representative Gottwald said. This bill has no business going to the Health Committee. It has to do with health insurance. Now, some health plans do go to the Health Committee. This type of health plan, what we're looking at here, is governed under the Commerce Department, not the Health Department. This bill is in exactly the right place where it should be. It does not need to go to the Health Committee, and I would urge a no vote.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Gottwald's healthy contribution plan is also in this bill, and that certainly has to do with health care reform. And members, I feel pretty strongly about this. Would Representative Gottwald yield to a question?
Representative Gottwald will yield. Representative Liebling.
Representative Gottwald, can you say here on the House floor that this bill would never, in your mind, never satisfy the requirement of a Minnesota-made health exchange?
The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Liebling, what's before us is whether or not this bill should be moved from the Tax Committee to the Health and Human Services Reform Committee. Unless the government wants to once again impose its federal mandates upon the state and somehow take something that's ours and twist it or turn it, I don't really see how you can turn this thing into an exchange. This is a premium account. It's used to help pool resources from various sources to pay for a private individual insurance premium. It's an insurance bill. Representative Liebling talked about the Minnesota Healthy Contribution Program. The only point in this bill about that is how the dollars are used to pay for that. It has nothing to do with the care within it. That bill was passed last year and is pretty much done. We're not proposing any change to that program whatsoever. So, again, Mr. Speaker and members, vote red. This belongs in taxes. It is an insurance bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, clearly the Healthy Contribution Program is clearly health reform. I don't know if I'd actually consider it reform, but it certainly changes health care, and obviously the way we pay for health care, we all know, impacts the way we use health care. You can't separate health insurance from health policy, and I would like a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Liebling requested a roll call on her motion. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on her motion to re-refer. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, a roll call being requested, the Chief Clerk will take the roll. The clerk. We'll close the roll. Representative Murphy M. votes aye. There being 52 ayes and 76 nays, the motion to re-refer is not adopted.
Banyan moves that House File 2720 be recalled from the Committee on Governmental Operations and Elections and re-referred to the Committee on State Government Finance.
The member from Stearns, Representative Banyan, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my bill. Spoken with both chairs. They've agreed to have it moved to State Government Finance. Appreciate your support. Thank you.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would Representative Banyan yield for question?
He will yield. Representative Nelson.
Representative Banyan, I'm looking at this bill, and on the page 4 of the bill, this bill is creating a commission. And I'm looking at our rules 4.13 subsection A. It says bills that establish or reestablish departments, agencies, or commissions are supposed to be heard in state government operations, and we have not heard this bill in state government operations. So are we trying to get around the deadlines here, or what are we doing here?
The member from Stearns, Representative Banyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, when this bill goes to State Government Finance, the commission that's contemplating it would be removed.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess we'll have to follow this when it goes through. If it gets to the floor and the commission's still there, well, it's going to have to get re-referred there, because if it has a commission, it's supposed to be heard in state government operations, and we haven't heard it yet there.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the Banyan motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Announcements. The member from Dakota, from Ramsey, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary or procedural question for Representative Szymanski, if he'd be willing to yield.
Representative Szymanski will yield.
Representative Szymanski, today in Judiciary Finance Committee, the committee adjourned prior to hearing 3 policy bills, and you announced that they'd be taken up next week because they met deadline, and I'm looking for some clarification on how they could meet deadline without any committee action being taken.
Representative Szymanski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Johnson, I may have misspoken or been misunderstood in terms of it. They are not meeting deadline this week, but they will meet the deadline next week. Bills in the possession of a finance committee can meet the second deadline.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Johnson. Discussion. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo. I'm sorry, announcements.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, members of the Education Finance Committee will be meeting immediately after session. We're just taking up the bonding priorities. The Woodard bill will be delayed to a future meeting. Room 5 immediately after session.
Announcements. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Those who are a part of education policy reform, we will reconvene at 7 o'clock in the basement. Thank you.
Gentleman from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Tax Committee, 10 o'clock, room 200. Representative Hortman's got the rolls. I got the coffee. See you there.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a reminder for folks to get their legislative audit topic selection votes in. I think the deadline is March 21st, and either send them directly to the legislative auditor or Representative Erickson or I could take them. Thank you.
Announcements. Member from Washington, the Majority Leader, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Monday, March 19th, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that the House adjourns today, adjourns until 3 p.m. Monday, March 19th, 2012. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Representative Dean.
I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. Monday, March 19th, 2012.